The sea had always been both companion and adversary to Samuel Finch. After 27 years as a Navy SEAL, its voice still lived in his mind, the steady roll of waves against steel hulls, the low rumble of engines beneath his feet, the wind that carried salt into his lungs until it became part of him. When Hurricane Florence bore down on North Carolina's Outer Banks in 2018, evacuation orders emptied the coastal community. But Samuel Finch, now 63, remained in his weathered house on the edge of the Atlantic. He'd faced worse, he thought, than whatever Florence could deliver. The storm hit with biblical fury, waves clawing 30 feet high as lightning fractured the night sky. By dawn, as the tempest finally subsided, Samuel surveyed the aftermath from his porch. That's when he saw it half buried in the sand, where the tide had retreated, a metal coffin, its brass fittings gleaming dully against the dark, corroded surface. What Samuel couldn't know was that this wasn't an ordinary burial casket. The elaborate locking mechanism, the naval insignia etched into its surface, this was something designed to protect its contents from the sea itself. And when he finally managed to break the seals and raise that heavy lid, the hardened veteran found himself doing something he hadn't done since burying his fellow SEALs years ago. He wept, for inside lay not just gold coins and precious gems worth millions, but a bridge to his own forgotten past, a 150-year-old secret that would challenge everything written in America's history books. The morning after Hurricane Florence retreated from the Carolina coast dawned clear and cool. The devastation was plain to see: boats tossed like toys into yards, piers reduced to splinters, houses with their roofs peeled back like sardine cans. But Samuel Finch's focus was elsewhere. He stood on the wet sand, staring at the strange object the retreating tide had revealed. The metal casket lay half buried at the edge of his property, seawater still lapping around its edges. A lesser storm might never have dislodged it from wherever it had rested all these years beneath the Atlantic. Samuel approached cautiously, his weathered boots sinking into the soft, wet sand. The years had been kind to his 6-foot frame, still solid though his dark hair had gone silver at the temples. His face, tanned and lined from decades at sea, remained impassive as he knelt beside the object. "What did you bring me, old friend?" he murmured to the ocean. The coffin was unlike any he'd seen before, made of what appeared to be bronze or copper, now patinated green in places from years underwater. Its dimensions suggested it was meant for a human body, yet the elaborate locking mechanism along its seam looked more appropriate for a bank vault than a burial casket. Naval insignias were etched into the metal, faded but recognizable to Samuel's trained eye as Confederate Navy markings. He ran his fingers over raised lettering near the head of the coffin, JDM. Below it, a circular emblem divided into quadrants. The craftsmanship was exceptional, even beneath the corrosion of salt water and time. Samuel straightened, wincing slightly at the protest from his lower back. 27 years of jumping out of planes and swimming in freezing waters had left their mark. He gazed out at the calm ocean, deceptively peaceful after yesterday's violence. "All right then," he said to himself, "let's get you up to the house." He trudged back up the beach to his modest 2-story home. The hurricane had spared it the worst, though his dock was half destroyed and the storage shed had lost part of its roof. The house itself stood firm. He'd built it to withstand far worse than Florence after retiring from the teams 15 years ago. From the storage shed, Samuel retrieved a heavy-duty winch chains in his ATV. Years of salvaging equipment from the ocean floor had taught him how to move heavy objects alone. He secured the ATV at the base of the dunes, ran the winch cable down to the coffin, and began the painstaking process of extraction. It took 2 hours of careful work to free the coffin from the sand's grip and drag it up past the tide line. Another hour to secure it on a makeshift sled behind the ATV and tow it to his workshop behind the house. By then the sun was high overhead and sweat soaked through Samuel's faded Navy t-shirt. Inside the workshop, a converted garage with concrete floors and sturdy workbenches, Samuel maneuvered the coffin onto a pair of sawhorses. He wiped his brow with a bandana from his back pocket and stood back to examine his find properly. "Well, JDM," he said to the empty room, "let's see what the sea wanted me to find." The cleaning came first. With methodical precision, Samuel hosed down the casket, removing sand and loosened corrosion. He worked with the patient thoroughness that had kept him alive through 3 decades of combat operations. No rushed movements, no assumptions. Everything by the book. As layers of marine growth and oxidation washed away, more details emerged. The coffin's seam was sealed with 12 heavy brass locks, each one bearing a different naval insignia, vessels Samuel realized of the Confederate Navy. The craftsmanship was remarkable for something made during the Civil War. He was drying the surface with old towels when a vehicle pulled into his driveway. Samuel glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall, a habit from years of watching his six, and recognized the sheriff's department SUV. Wiping his hands, he walked out to meet his visitor. Marcus Wheeler stepped out of the vehicle, all 6'4" of him unfolding like a pocket knife. The sheriff wore his tan uniform with the ease of a man comfortable in his own authority. At 50, the former Marine still maintained the physique that had once made him a force in force recon. His dark skin had grown a few more laugh lines since taking office, but his eyes remained sharp and observant. "Sam," he called out, tipping his hat, "good to see you made it through." "Marcus?" Samuel nodded. The two men had a relationship built on mutual respect and shared experience, the unspoken brotherhood of those who've served in the military's most elite units. "Checking on survivors. Making my rounds. Most folks evacuated like they were supposed to." There was gentle admonishment in his tone. "Got about 30% of the county without power still. You need anything?" Samuel shook his head. "Solar panels held up. Generators fueled if needed. I'm all set." Marcus nodded, his gaze drifting toward the open workshop door. "Found something." There was a moment's hesitation. Samuel had planned to keep the coffin to himself until he knew what he was dealing with, but Marcus wasn't just any lawman. They'd pulled each other out of enough bad situations in Afghanistan to build a trust that went beyond badges and jurisdictions. "Hurricane brought me a visitor," Samuel said finally. "Civil War era, I think. Worth taking a look." Marcus followed him into the workshop, his eyebrows rising at the sight of the coffin. "Well, that's not your typical storm debris. Confederate Navy," Samuel pointed to the insignias, "made to be watertight. Those aren't normal coffin locks." Marcus circled the object slowly. "No, they're not." He studied the markings. "JDM. Any idea who that might be?" "Not yet," Samuel replied, "but I intend to find out." "You know, I should be calling the Historical Society right about now," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he wasn't reaching for his phone. "Potential historical artifact maritime salvage laws." Samuel gave a small smile. "I know the law, Sheriff. Just want to see what's inside first. Then we can do everything by the book." Marcus studied his friend's face for a long moment. "I didn't see this today," he said finally, "but I expect a call when you open it. And if it's something significant, you'll be the first to know," Samuel promised. After Marcus left, Samuel returned to the coffin with renewed focus. The locks were his immediate challenge, complex mechanisms, corroded by a century and a half underwater. He gathered his tools, penetrating oil brass brushes, precision picks, and a selection of custom tools he'd fabricated over years of working on marine salvage. The first lock took nearly an hour to clean and manipulate. Samuel worked methodically, applying penetrating oil and allowing it to seep into the mechanism, then carefully working the tumblers with his picks. The delicate work required both strength and finesse qualities that had served him well in his former profession. When the first lock finally yielded with a satisfying click, Samuel allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. 11 more to go. The sun was setting by the time he cracked the fourth lock. His hands were cramping, eyes strained from the focused work. He stretched, rolling his shoulders to release the tension that had built there. Through the workshop windows, he could see the ocean turning golden in the fading light. "Time to break for the day, JDM," he said to the coffin. "We'll continue this conversation tomorrow." After a simple dinner of grilled fish and vegetables, Samuel sat at his desk in the small study overlooking the ocean. His laptop hummed softly as he began searching for information on Confederate naval officers with the initials JDM, who might have been active during the Civil War. The search yielded several possibilities, but one name appeared in multiple historical references: James Davis, Montgomery, captain in the Confederate States Navy, commanding officer of the CSS Phantom, a blockade runner that disappeared in early 1865 while reportedly carrying a significant cargo of gold and valuables. Samuel leaned back in his chair, processing this information. The timing aligned with the final months of the war, when the Confederacy was desperately moving assets to prevent their capture by advancing Union forces. He printed several articles about Montgomery and the Phantom, then pulled an old book from his shelf, a comprehensive history of naval operations during the Civil War. The volume had belonged to his father, a career Navy man who had instilled in Samuel a deep respect for maritime history and tradition. As he flipped through the pages, a photograph slipped out his father in his dress whites, standing proudly beside Samuel at his SEAL qualification ceremony. The elder Finch's face beamed with pride, his own naval service honored through his son's achievement. Samuel studied the image for a long moment. His father had passed away 5 years ago, taking with him many of the family stories Samuel had never made time to hear during his busy military career. What would he make of this mysterious coffin from the same war he'd studied so passionately? Setting the photo aside, Samuel returned to his research. The CSS Phantom had vanished during a violent storm off the Carolina coast in February 1865, presumed sunk with all hands. Its cargo, reportedly gold-silver and important Confederate documents, was never recovered. Could this coffin be connected to that lost ship? The coincidence seemed too great to ignore. With renewed determination, Samuel returned to the workshop early the next morning. The remaining locks would require all his skill and patience, but now he had additional motivation. This wasn't just an interesting salvage project, it was potentially a significant historical find. The fifth lock surrendered by mid-morning the 6th, shortly after noon. Each mechanism was unique, requiring different approaches. Some yielded to gentle persuasion, others demanded more forceful techniques. Samuel approached each one as he had approached the countless obstacles in his military career, with patience, ingenuity, and absolute focus. By late afternoon, 11 locks had been defeated. Only one remained, the largest and most complex, positioned at the center of the coffin's hoist seal. Samuel studied it carefully, noting the distinct naval insignia, the CSS Phantom itself. "So you are the key to this mystery," he murmured, tracing the emblem with his fingertip. This final lock resisted his initial attempts. Even after cleaning and applying penetrating oil, the mechanism remained stubbornly frozen. Samuel considered more aggressive methods, but hesitated to risk damaging whatever might lie inside. After several frustrating hours, he stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. The direct approach wasn't working. He needed to think differently. Samuel studied the lock again, this time looking beyond the obvious mechanism. The insignia itself seemed slightly askew compared to the others, raised at one edge as though, "Of course," he muttered. The insignia wasn't just decoration, it was part of the locking mechanism itself. He applied pressure to the edge of the emblem, pushing it in the direction of the slight tilt. There was resistance, then a soft click as something inside the lock disengaged. The center plate rotated slightly, revealing a keyhole that had been hidden beneath it. Samuel sat back on his heels, impressed. Clever Captain Montgomery. The keyhole presented a new challenge. He had no key. But in his years as a SEAL, Samuel had learned that every lock had a weakness. He selected his finest tension wrench and pick, took a deep breath to steady his hands, and began the delicate work of feeling out the tumblers. 20 minutes later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the final lock surrendered with a solid thunk. A mechanism inside the keyman disengaged, and the heavy lid shifted slightly. Samuel paused, his heart beating faster than he'd expected. After all he'd seen in his military career, a salvaged coffin shouldn't provoke such anticipation. Yet something about this moment felt significant, as though the sea had delivered this artifact to him specifically. He positioned himself at the head of the coffin, gripped the edge of the lid, and slowly lifted. The seal broke with a soft hiss of air. The interior had remained airtight all these years. The lid was heavier than expected, requiring all his strength to raise and lower it gently to rest against the workshop wall. What Samuel saw inside made him freeze, breath caught in his throat. Not a body as one might expect in a coffin. Instead, the interior was divided into compartments, each carefully designed to hold different items. And what items? They were gold coins, arranged in neat stacks. Silver bars, jewelry studded with gemstones, all preserved in remarkable condition within the sealed environment. "My God," Samuel whispered. But it wasn't just treasure. Alongside the valuables were documents protected in oilskin wrappings, a leather-bound journal map sealed in copper tubes, and various other artifacts carefully arranged and secured. In the center compartment, resting on a velvet cushion that had somehow survived the centuries, lay a silver pocket watch and a medallion on a chain. Samuel lifted the medallion carefully. It was silver, intricately engraved with the woman's profile on one side. On the reverse was an inscription, For freedom to FF. Those initials FF struck a chord. Finch was not a common surname. Could there be a connection? The pocket watch was equally remarkable, solid silver with the monogram JDM on its cover. Samuel opened it carefully. Inside the cover was another inscription, "To James Navigate by your heart. With love, Sarah." As he set these personal items aside, Samuel noticed something else. The velvet cushion they had rested on was actually a hidden compartment. Lifting it revealed a sealed glass vial containing what appeared to be a folded document. Before he could investigate further, the sound of tires on gravel alerted him to a visitor. The security monitor showed Marcus's SUV pulling up. Samuel had been so absorbed in his discovery that he'd lost track of time. The sun had set and stars were beginning to appear in the clear post-hurricane sky. Samuel quickly placed the medallion and watch back in the coffin, but left the lid open. He had promised Marcus he'd call when he opened it, and though he was late on that promise, he wouldn't compound it by hiding anything now. Marcus whistled low when he entered the workshop and saw the open coffin. "You got it open, and it's not what we thought." "No bodies," Samuel confirmed. "Something more valuable." Marcus approached slowly, his trained eye taking in the organized compartments of treasure and documents. "That's significant." He leaned closer to examine a stack of gold coins. "Confederate mint." "In Spanish, from what I can tell," Samuel replied, "along with documents and personal effects, all preserved by the watertight seal." "This isn't just a random find, Sam. This is historically significant." Marcus straightened, his expression serious. "And extremely valuable." Samuel nodded. "I know. That's why I wanted you here." "Who was JDM?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the monogram on the coffin. "James Davis Montgomery, according to my research. Confederate Navy captain. Commanded a blockade runner called the CSS Phantom." Samuel handed Marcus the printouts from his research. "Ship disappeared in 1865 with a cargo of gold and important documents." Marcus scanned the papers, his brow furrowing. "So this coffin was designed to preserve the cargo, not bury a body. Smart. If the ship was going down, they could at least try to save the most valuable items." "That's my thinking," Samuel agreed. "And someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure it would remain sealed, 12 different locks, each with a unique mechanism." "But why a coffin?" Marcus wondered aloud. "Why not a standard strongbox or safe?" "Misdirection, maybe," Samuel suggested. "If Union forces captured it, they might not look too closely at what appeared to be a burial casket." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense." He studied the contents again. "You need to report this, Sam. Maritime salvage laws." "I know the laws," Samuel interrupted gently, "and I will report it. But there's something else." He held up the medallion. "These initials FF, my family name is Finch. A lot of people with those initials," Marcus pointed out. "True, but combined with this." Samuel indicated the hidden compartment in the glass vial. "I'd like to know if there's a connection before this gets swept into government hands." Marcus was silent for a long moment, weighing his duty against their friendship. Finally, he sighed. "The storm damaged a lot of infrastructure. County's still in emergency response mode. Might take a few days before we can properly process something like this." Samuel understood the gift his friend was offering time to investigate before official channels took over. "I appreciate that." 3 days, Marcus said firmly. "Then we do this by the book. And in the meantime, you need better security than these workshop locks." He glanced around the space. "Word about finds like this has a way of traveling fast." "I've got motion sensors and cameras covering the property," Samuel assured him. "Old habits." "Good. Keep them active." Marcus headed for the door, then paused. "There's someone who might be able to help you make sense of this faster. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood at Coastal Carolina University. Specializes in Civil War naval history. Sharp as they come. You know her. She helped authenticate some Civil War artifacts for the county museum last year. I can give her a call if you want." Samuel considered this briefly. "Might be good to have an expert opinion." "I'll set it up." Marcus gave him a significant look. 3 days, Sam." After Marcus left, Samuel returned to the mysterious vial. Working carefully, he extracted the glass container from its housing and examined it. The document inside appeared to be a letter, the paper yellowed but intact, preserved in what he guessed was an early form of vacuum sealing. This would require specialized equipment to open properly without risking damage to the contents. Samuel decided it would have to wait. Perhaps Dr. Blackwood would have the expertise to handle such delicate historical materials. Instead, he turned his attention to the journal. The leather binding was still supple, protected from the corrosive effects of seawater by the Coffin's perfect seal. The cover bore the embossed initials JDM and the year 1865. Samuel carefully opened it, revealing pages of neat flowing script. The first entry was dated January 18, 1865. Orders received to transport special cargo from Charleston to Nassau. Phantom prepared for departure on tomorrow's evening tide. Colonel Whitford personally delivered the manifest gold from Richmond Treasury documents from the Secretary's office and personal effects of certain government officials. These are dark days for our cause. Charleston will not hold much longer. This may be our last opportunity to secure these assets. Samuel continued reading, absorbing Captain Montgomery's account of the final desperate months of the Confederacy. The journal entries chronicled the preparation of the CSS Phantom for its secret mission, the loading of the precious cargo, and the tense departure under cover of darkness to evade the Union blockade. Montgomery wrote of his concerns about the mission, doubts about the Confederate cause, and increasingly references to someone identified only as F, a person who seemed to hold the captain's respect and confidence. The entry for February 10, 1865, caught Samuel's particular attention. F has confirmed what I have long suspected. The war is truly lost. Richmond will fall within months. Yet our orders remain to deliver this gold, not to secure safe haven for our government officials, but to purchase more arms and continue this bloody conflict. How many more young men must die for a cause that cannot prevail, F? And I have spoken at length. We are of one mind on what must be done, though the risk is tremendous. May God forgive us if we are wrong, and may history understand if we are right. The next entry described a violent storm that struck the Phantom as it approached the Outer Banks. The ship was taking on water driven dangerously close to shoals. Then a curious passage. The decision is made. We cannot in good conscience deliver these funds to prolong a war that has already taken too many lives. F has prepared the special container as discussed. If we are successful, the cargo will be secured where neither side can use it to further this conflict. If we fail, may those who find this record understand we acted not from cowardice or greed, but from the conviction that peace must come even at great cost. The final entry was brief, dated February 12, 1865. Storm worsens, Phantom unlikely to survive the night. The coffin is ready, its contents secured. F has the coordinates memorized and will attempt to reach Union lines if we survive. I remain on board to ensure the ship's course. If these words are ever read, know that James Davis Montgomery acted according to his conscience, not his orders. And let it be known that F. The entry ended abruptly there, as though the writer had been interrupted. Samuel turned the page, but the rest of the journal was blank. He sat back processing what he'd read. The story emerging was far more complex than a simple shipwreck. Montgomery and this mysterious F had apparently planned to intentionally divert the Confederate Treasury funds, hiding them to prevent their use in prolonging the war. It was an act of principle and high treason against the Confederacy. Samuel's gaze drifted to the medallion with its inscription, "For freedom to FF." Could F be FF? And could there possibly be a connection to his own family name? The question nagged at him as he carefully cataloged the contents of the coffin over the next several hours. The gold alone was substantial, over 200 coins of various origins, primarily American and Spanish. The silver included both coins and small ingots. The jewelry pieces appeared to be personal items rather than monetary assets, perhaps belonging to the government officials mentioned in the journal. The documents in their oilskin wrappings presented another challenge. Samuel was hesitant to unwrap them without proper conservation techniques. From what he could see through the oilskin, they appeared to include maps, official-looking papers with seals and letters. By the time he finished his initial inventory, it was past midnight. Samuel secured the workshop, activating the motion sensors and cameras as he'd promised Marcus. The coffin's contents were too valuable to move to his safe, so he left everything in place, relying on his security system and relative isolation to protect the find overnight. Back in his study, Samuel couldn't resist digging deeper into his family history. His knowledge of his ancestors was frustratingly limited. His father had never been one for genealogy, focusing more on the present and future than the past. What Samuel did know was that the Finch family had a long history of military service dating back to the Civil War, though the details were sketchy. An online search of military records yielded some interesting results. There was indeed a Finch who served during the Civil War. Franklin Finch listed as a free man of color who served with the Union Navy from 1863 to 1865. The record indicated he had specialized knowledge of the Carolina coast and served as a pilot and navigator. Samuel stared at the screen, pulse quickening. A navigator named Franklin Finch FF, who would have had the skills to help guide a ship like the Phantom. Could this be the mysterious F from Montgomery's journal? And if so, what was a Union sailor doing collaborating with a Confederate captain? The questions multiplied, but answers would have to wait. Samuel's eyes were growing heavy, the day's exertions finally catching up with him. He saved his research, closed the laptop, and headed to bed, his dreams filled with stormy seas and mysterious coffins rising from the depths. Morning arrived with the harsh blare of Samuel's phone. The caller ID showed Marcus. "Hershaya, Blackwood can meet you today at 10, Marcus said without preamble. "I told her you found some Civil War naval artifacts that need assessment. Didn't give specifics." "Appreciate it," Samuel replied, glancing at the clock. It was just past 7 a.m. "She's expecting you at her office on campus. Founders Hall Room 237. There was a pause. "And Sam, I ran the plates on a vehicle that drove by your place twice last night. Rental car from Norfolk. Could be nothing but." Samuel was instantly alert. Description: dark SUV, Virginia plates, single male driver. Security company flagged it because it passed your property at 1 a.m. and again at 3. "Thanks for the heads up. Keep your eyes open," Marcus advised before hanging up. Samuel's military instincts kicked in immediately. Someone was showing interest in his property hours after he'd opened the coffin. That couldn't be coincidence. Only he and Marcus knew about the contents, which meant either someone had been watching when he brought the coffin up from the beach, or information had leaked from somewhere else. After a quick breakfast, Samuel returned to the workshop. Everything remained undisturbed, but he took additional precautions, covering the open coffin with a tarp and moving his truck to block the workshop doors from direct view from the road. Next, he prepared a secure container for the items he wanted Dr. Blackwood to examine: the journal, the medallion, and photographs of the coffin and its contents. He deliberately left out the sealed glass vial and the majority of the valuables. As he worked, Samuel considered the timing. 3 days until Marcus would officially report the find. That gave him a narrow window to uncover any family connection and to understand the true story of Captain Montgomery, the mysterious Franklin Finch, and the deliberate sinking of the CSS Phantom. The drive to Coastal Carolina University took just under an hour. The campus showed signs of the hurricane's passage, fallen branches, maintenance crews clearing debris, but appeared to have escaped major damage. Founders Hall was a stately brick building near the center of campus, its architecture reminiscent of the antebellum South. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood's office reflected its occupant, perfectly organized, yet comfortably cluttered, with books, maps, and historical artifacts. The walls were covered with framed historical documents and photographs of Civil War naval vessels. Eleanor herself was not what Samuel had expected. In her early 50s, she had sharp blue eyes behind stylish glasses, and her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a blazer over a blouse with jeans, professional but not formal. "Mr. Finch," she greeted him, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "Marcus speaks highly of you, says you found something interesting." "Thank you for making time, Dr. Blackwood," Samuel replied, setting his secure case on her desk. "And yes, I believe I have." "Eleanor, please." She gestured to a chair. Marcus mentioned Civil War naval artifacts. Samuel nodded, opening the case. "I found a sealed metal coffin that washed up after Hurricane Florence. Based on the markings, it belonged to Captain James Davis Montgomery of the CSS Phantom." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "Montgomery the Phantom." She leaned forward with sudden intensity. "Mr. Finch, if this is authentic, it's an extraordinary find. The Phantom disappeared in 1865 with a significant portion of the Confederate treasury on board." "So I've learned," Samuel said, removing the journal and placing it carefully on her desk. This was inside. along with gold, silver documents and this. He set the medallion beside the journal. Eleanor put on a pair of cotton gloves before touching either item. She opened the journal with extreme care, her expression changing from professional interest to something approaching reverence as she scanned the first few pages. "This appears to be Montgomery's personal log," she said, voice hushed. "The handwriting matches known samples of his correspondence." She looked up at Samuel. "Where exactly did you find this?" Samuel described the coffin's discovery, its elaborate locking mechanism, and the general nature of its contents without going into specific details about the value of the treasure or its current location. Eleanor listened intently, occasionally making notes. When he mentioned the mysterious F referenced in the journal, her eyes narrowed with interest. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the medallion. Samuel nodded. Eleanor examined it carefully, turning it over to read the inscription. "For freedom, to FF," she read aloud. "Interesting." She looked up at Samuel. "And your last name is Finch. You're wondering if there's a connection." "It crossed my mind," Samuel admitted. "I found records of a Franklin Finch who served in the Union Navy during that period, a navigator familiar with the Carolina coast." Eleanor set down the medallion and turned to her computer. "Let me check something." Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed a database. "Yes, here he is. Franklin Finch, born 1830 in North Carolina to free parents. Served as a pilot and navigator in the Union Navy from 1863 to 1865. Noted for his exceptional knowledge of coastal waterways." She continued reading, then paused, her expression changing. "This is interesting. After the war, he was briefly investigated for possible involvement with Confederate assets, but the case was dropped for lack of evidence." Confederate assets. Samuel leaned forward. "Like the Phantom's cargo." "Possibly." Eleanor returned to the journal, carefully turning pages until she reached the entries Samuel had found most significant. She read in silence for several minutes, her frown deepening. "This suggests Montgomery and this F, presumably Franklin Finch, conspired to prevent the Confederate gold from being used to prolong the war," she said finally. "An act of conscience, but also high treason from the Confederate perspective. And questionable from the Union side as well," Samuel pointed out. "If Finch helped divert assets that could have been captured by Union forces." "Precisely." Eleanor sat back, considering. "It would explain why Finch was investigated after the war, though apparently cleared." She tapped the journal thoughtfully. "The question is, what happened to them after the Phantom went down? The historical record states the ship was lost with all hands, but if Montgomery prepared this coffin to preserve these items, then he planned for someone to find it eventually," Samuel finished. Eleanor nodded. "And the fact that it contained personal items like this medallion suggests it was meant as more than just a secure container. It was a time capsule, a record of what really happened." She picked up the medallion again, studying the woman's profile engraved on its surface. "The craftsmanship suggests mid-19th century. Have you identified the woman?" Samuel shook his head. "No, though there was a pocket watch with an inscription from someone named Sarah to Montgomery." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "Sarah?" She turned to her computer again, typing rapidly. "There's very little personal information about Montgomery in the historical record, but..." She paused, reading something on her screen. "Here, one reference in a letter from a fellow officer mentions Montgomery's unusual domestic situation and refers to a woman named Sarah who, despite her circumstances, carries herself with remarkable dignity." "What do you think that means?" Samuel asked. Eleanor looked up, her expression thoughtful. "In the context of the 1860s South, an unusual domestic situation could refer to a relationship that crossed racial boundaries. It was illegal in most southern states for whites and blacks to marry. The implication hung in the air between them." Samuel processed this new information, pieces beginning to align in his mind. "You think Montgomery and this Sarah were involved despite the social and legal prohibitions?" "It's a possibility, Pamela," Eleanor confirmed. "And if Sarah was connected to Franklin Finch, perhaps a relative, it would explain the unusual alliance between a Confederate captain and a Union navigator." Samuel sat back, considering the personal drama that might underlie the historical facts. So Montgomery and Finch weren't just motivated by wanting to end the war. They had personal reasons to work together. "History is always personal, Mr. Finch," Eleanor said with a small smile. "The grand movements of armies and nations are ultimately driven by individual human beings with their own motivations, relationships, and moral compasses. She carefully closed the journal and looked at Samuel directly. This find could significantly revise our understanding of the final days of the Confederacy and the fate of a substantial portion of its treasury. It has immense historical value. I understand, Samuel said. I intend to report it properly. But first, I'd like to determine if there's a family connection. If Franklin Finch is my ancestor, this is part of my personal history as well. Eleanor studied him for a moment, then nodded. I have access to genealogical databases through the university. With your permission, I could help you trace your family line to determine if there's a connection to Franklin Finch. I'd appreciate that. It would help if you could provide some information about your known ancestors, your father, grandfather, where they were from. Samuel shared what he knew: his father, William Finch, born in Norfolk, Virginia. His grandfather, Thomas Finch, also from Virginia. It wasn't much to go on, but Eleanor assured him it was a start. One more thing, Samuel said, reaching into his case. I took photographs of the coffin and some of the documents inside. I was hesitant to unwrap them without proper conservation techniques. Eleanor examined the photographs with growing excitement. These appear to be official Confederate Navy documents, possibly ship manifest orders or financial records. She pointed to one image. That seal is from the Confederate Secretary of the Treasury. These could provide unprecedented insights into the Confederacy's final financial maneuvers. She looked up at Samuel, her expression serious. Mr. Finch, I cannot overstate the historical significance of what you've found. This should be properly documented, conserved, and studied by experts. And it will be, Samuel assured her. But I'd like to understand the full story first, especially if my family is part of it. Eleanor seemed to make a decision. I'll help you. The university has conservation facilities that could properly handle these documents. If you're willing, I could arrange for secure transport and begin the preservation process while we investigate the genealogical angle. Samuel weighed the offer. On one hand, allowing the university access to the artifacts would mean losing some control over his find. On the other, proper conservation was essential, and Eleanor's expertise could be invaluable. Let me consider it, he said finally. In the meantime, anything you can find about Franklin Finch and his connection to Montgomery would be helpful. Of course. Eleanor handed him her card. My personal cell is on the back. Call me anytime if you have questions or decide to bring in the documents. As Samuel prepared to leave, Eleanor asked one more question. Have you told anyone else about this find? Just Sheriff Wheeler, Samuel replied. Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's good. Discoveries like this have a way of attracting attention, not all of it welcome. There are private collectors who would pay enormous sums to acquire artifacts like these outside official channels. I'll keep that in mind, Samuel said, thinking of the vehicle Marcus had reported. On the drive back to his home, Samuel processed everything he'd learned. The possibility that Franklin Finch might be his ancestor added a personal dimension to the historical mystery. If true, it meant his family had played a significant role in a little-known aspect of Civil War history, a role that had apparently been deliberately obscured. As he turned onto the coastal road that led to his property, Samuel noticed a dark SUV parked at a small public beach access about a quarter-mile from his driveway. Virginia plates. His combat-honed instincts immediately registered the vehicle as a potential threat, matching Marcus's description of the car that had driven by during the night. Instead of turning into his driveway, Samuel continued past, observing the SUV in his rearview mirror. A single male occupant sat in the driver's seat, apparently watching the road. Samuel couldn't make out his features clearly, but the man's attention seemed focused on the area near Samuel's property. Surveillance. But by whom? And how had they learned about his find so quickly? Samuel drove another mile down the coastal road before turning around. When he passed the beach access exit again, the SUV was still there. This time he made direct eye contact with the driver, letting him know he'd been spotted before turning into his driveway. The security system showed no alerts during his absence. Samuel did a careful sweep of his property before approaching the workshop, his sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 he had carried since his SEAL days, holstered at his hip. The workshop was undisturbed, the coffin still covered by the tarp. Samuel secured the doors and returned to the house where he called Marcus. That SUV is back, he reported. Parked at the public beach access down the road. Single male watching my place. Description of the driver, Marcus asked. Caucasian, dark hair, late 30s or early 40s. Couldn't see more detail from the road. I'll send a deputy to check it out. Could be innocent storm chaser looking at damage insurance adjuster. Could be, Samuel agreed, though neither of them believed it. What's the word around town? Anyone talking about strange finds after the hurricane? Nothing specific, Marcus replied, though Ryan Caldwell has been asking questions at the harbor master's office about salvage regulations. Caldwell, the name was vaguely familiar to Samuel. The collector, more than a collector, family's been in antiques and historical artifacts for generations. Got a reputation for acquiring items through flexible interpretations of salvage laws. Marcus's tone conveyed his opinion of such practices. Has a place up in Virginia, comes down a few times a year for auctions and estate sales. Virginia plates, Samuel filed away this information. Any reason he'd be interested in my property specifically? Hard to say. Storm churned up a lot of stuff all along the coast. But I'll keep an ear out. Marcus paused. How'd it go with Dr. Blackwood? Samuel summarized his meeting with Eleanor, including her confirmation of the journal's authenticity and the possible connection to Franklin Finch. So there might be a personal angle to this, Marcus observed. Looks that way. Samuel glanced out his window toward the workshop. She offered university resources to properly conserve the documents. Smart move, Marcus approved. Those kinds of materials need special handling. After ending the call, Samuel spent the afternoon securing his property more thoroughly. He moved the most valuable items from the coffin, the gold and silver, to his home safe. The documents remained in the workshop, still in their protective oilskin, but now locked in a waterproof case. As evening approached, Samuel noticed the SUV had departed from the beach access. In its place, a different vehicle appeared, a black pickup truck with darkened windows. Same position, same apparent purpose, watching his property. The surveillance confirmed his suspicions. Word had somehow spread about his find, and someone was very interested enough to establish continuous observation of his home. Samuel decided it was time for a more direct approach. Under cover of dusk, he slipped out the back of his property and made his way through the wooded area that separated his land from the public beach access. Years of special operations had made him adept at moving silently even through difficult terrain. He approached the pickup from behind, using the growing darkness for cover. The driver was focused on Samuel's house and didn't notice the silent figure that materialized beside his window until Samuel tapped the glass with the barrel of his cig. The man inside jumped, his hand moving reflexively toward his waistband before freezing at the sight of the weapon pointed at him. Evening, Samuel said calmly. Mind telling me why you're so interested in my property? The driver, younger than Samuel had expected, perhaps early 30s, with short blonde hair and a military bearing, slowly raised his hands. No trouble, man. Just doing a job. Which is observation. That's all. I'm not armed. His accent placed him from somewhere in the Midwest. Who hired you? The man hesitated. Samuel pressed the gun more firmly against the glass. Let's try again. Who hired you? Caldwell, the man admitted. Ryan Caldwell, said to watch the property note. Who comes and goes? Nothing illegal. Except trespassing and harassment, Samuel pointed out. He studied the man more carefully. The short haircut, the way he held himself, the faded tattoo partially visible on his forearm, military almost certainly. Marines. The man blinked in surprise. 2 tours, Afghanistan. Samuel nodded. Fellow veteran. He lowered the weapon slightly, but kept it visible. I'm going to give you one chance, Marine. Tell Caldwell that Samuel Finch's property is off limits. Next person I catch watching my house won't get a friendly warning. Clear. Crystal, the man replied, tension evident in his voice. Now drive away. Don't come back. Samuel stepped back from the vehicle, keeping the gun at his side. The pickup started, immediately executing a hasty 3-point turn before accelerating down the coastal road. Back at his house, Samuel considered his next moves. Ryan Caldwell's interest confirmed that information about the coffin had leaked somehow. The question was, how much did Caldwell know about what Samuel had found? He decided to do some research of his own. Ryan Caldwell's name brought up numerous results online, an established dealer in historical artifacts with a gallery in Norfolk particularly focused on Civil War-era items. Several articles mentioned his family's long history in the field, dating back to the early 1900s. One photograph caught Samuel's attention, Caldwell accepting an award from a historical preservation society. He was in his 40s, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit with the confident smile of old money and social position. But it was the name of Caldwell's gallery that truly gave Samuel pause. Montgomery Collection Fine Antiques and Historical Artifacts. Montgomery, the same name as the Confederate captain. Could this be coincidence? Or did Ryan Caldwell have a personal connection to James Davis Montgomery, just as Samuel might have a connection to Franklin Finch? The possibility added another layer to the mystery. If Caldwell was a descendant of Montgomery, he might have family stories or records that could fill in the gaps in the historical record. He might even know about the Phantom's cargo and its fate. But his approach putting Samuel's property under surveillance, rather than making direct contact, suggested less than honorable intentions. Samuel's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Eleanor Blackwood. "Mr. Finch," she said when he answered, excitement evident in her voice. "I found something you need to see. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning?" "What kind of something?" Samuel asked. "It's about Franklin Finch and James Montgomery. I was checking university archives and found references to both men in a collection of papers donated 30 years ago, including," she paused dramatically, "a photograph." A photograph. Samuel was instantly alert. Photography had existed during the Civil War, but images from that era were rare and valuable historical artifacts in themselves. "Yes, and Mr. Finch, there's a striking resemblance between you and the man identified as Franklin Finch. I think we may have confirmed your family connection." Samuel stared at the phone, momentarily speechless. "A photograph of Franklin Finch from the Civil War era." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "It's part of a collection donated by the Meriwether family in the 1990s. Their ancestor served alongside Franklin Finch in the Union Navy. The photograph shows several sailors aboard what appears to be a gunboat. One man is identified as F. Finch in the accompanying notes. I'll be there first thing tomorrow." "I thought you might say that. I've already reserved one of our conservation rooms." 8 o'clock. "I'll be there." Samuel hung up and turned to look out the window. Darkness had fallen completely now, the moonlight casting a silver path across the black water. Something about this discovery felt predestined, as though the hurricane had deliberately unearthed the coffin after more than a century and a half, delivering it to perhaps the one person who could appreciate its true significance. He checked the security monitors one last time before heading to bed. The beach access remained empty, no sign of Caldwell's man or any other observers. Still, Samuel set the perimeter alarms and kept his sidearm within reach. Old habits that had served him well through decades of service. Sleep came fitfully haunted by dreams of stormy seas and faces he couldn't quite recognize, men in Union and Confederate uniforms, standing side by side despite the war that divided them. Dawn broke with steel-gray clouds gathering on the horizon. Another storm system approaching, though nothing like Florence's fury. Samuel rose early, showered and dressed in clothes suitable for a university meeting, khakis and a button-down shirt beneath a weathered leather jacket. He secured his property, double-checking the workshop locks before departing. The drive to the university felt longer this time, anticipation stretching the minutes. Samuel found himself gripping the steering wheel too tightly, consciously relaxing his hands when he noticed. The possibility of seeing his ancestor's face, of confirming a connection to this historical mystery, had affected him more deeply than he'd expected. Eleanor was waiting at the side entrance to Founders Hall, a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups in hand. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering him one as they walked. "Conservation rooms in the basement. Climate-controlled, restricted access. You went to some trouble. This is potentially groundbreaking historical material, Mr. Finch, worth a little extra effort." They descended a staircase and passed through 2 security doors, Eleanor swiping her ID card at each. The conservation room resembled a laboratory more than a typical university facility. Stark white walls, specialized lighting, stainless steel tables, and various instruments Samuel didn't recognize. "Here's what I found," Eleanor said, gesturing to a folder laid out on the central table. She pulled on a pair of cotton gloves and handed a second pair to Samuel. Inside the folder was a collection of brittle yellowed documents, carefully preserved in acid-free sleeves. Eleanor gently removed one containing what appeared to be a letter written in faded ink. "This is correspondence from Lieutenant Commander Thomas Meriwether to his wife dated March 1865. He mentions serving with a remarkable pilot named Finch, a colored man whose knowledge of these waters is unmatched." She set that document aside and pulled out another sleeve. "This is a roster from the USS Whitehall, a Union gunboat that patrolled the Carolina coast in late 1864 and early 1865. Franklin Finch is listed as a civilian pilot attached to the vessel. Samuel nodded, absorbing these details. And the photograph, Eleanor smiled, moving to a separate folder. I saved the best for last. She carefully extracted a protective sleeve containing a sepia-toned photograph mounted on heavy cardstock. It showed the deck of a Union warship, steam rising from its stack. In the foreground stood 5 men, 4 in naval uniforms and 1 in civilian clothes. The civilian was a tall black man with a serious expression, standing slightly apart from the others, but with an unmistakable air of competence and dignity. That's Franklin Finch, Eleanor said, pointing to the civilian. According to the notes, this was taken aboard the USS Whitehall in January 1865, just weeks before the Phantom disappeared. Samuel leaned closer, studying the face. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable, the same high forehead, strong jawline, and most strikingly the same eyes that looked back at Samuel from his mirror each morning. Eyes that had seen the same ocean through generations, separated by time but connected by blood. There's more, Eleanor said quietly, producing another sleeve. This was in a separate envelope marked Personal TM. I believe Merriweather kept it private due to its potentially controversial nature. The second photograph showed 2 men in civilian clothes standing side by side. One was clearly Franklin Finch. The other was a white man in his 30s with a neat beard and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. James Davis Montgomery, Eleanor confirmed before Samuel could ask. This is the only known photograph of Montgomery and Finch together. It was taken in Norfolk according to the notation on the back. December 1864. Samuel stared at the image, transfixed. The 2 men stood closer than would be typical for the era, their postures suggesting mutual respect, rather than the racial hierarchy common at the time. More striking was their expression, a shared determination, as though they were already united in some common purpose. They knew each other before the Phantom's last voyage, Samuel said. So it appears, which raises fascinating questions about their collaboration. Eleanor carefully returned the photographs to their protective sleeves. There's one more document I found particularly interesting. She extracted a final sleeve containing what appeared to be a page torn from a personal journal. The handwriting was different from Montgomery's, less refined, but clear and determined. This is from Merriweather's personal diary. After the war, he notes that he encountered Franklin Finch in Norfolk in late 1865. Finch was working as a harbor pilot, but was under investigation by the Treasury Department. Merriweather writes that he vouched for Finch's character, but was troubled by rumors that Finch had been involved with the disappearance of certain Confederate assets. Samuel read the passage himself. So Finch survived whatever happened to the Phantom. Yes, which contradicts the official record that the ship was lost with all hands. Eleanor tapped the diary page thoughtfully. Merriweather adds that Finch had a wife named Sarah and a newborn son. Sarah, Samuel repeated, remembering the inscription in the pocket watch. Navigate by your heart. With love, Sarah. I have a theory, Eleanor said, arranging the documents side by side. Based on these materials and the artifacts you found, I believe that Montgomery and Finch weren't just collaborating to end the war sooner. They were connected personally through this woman, Sarah. How so? In the context of the time, an interracial relationship would have been not just socially unacceptable, but illegal in most states. If Sarah was Franklin Finch's sister and Montgomery's lover, or perhaps even his secret wife, that would give them both a powerful personal motivation beyond politics. Samuel finished, a shared family connection. Exactly, and it would explain the extraordinary trust between them, enough for a Confederate captain to conspire with a Union pilot to divert a shipment of gold. Samuel sat down processing this information. If true, it meant his ancestor had been part of one of the most daring acts of conscience during the Civil War and had been connected through family ties to both sides of the conflict. There's more, Eleanor said. I took the liberty of running a preliminary genealogical search based on the information you provided about your father and grandfather. She opened her laptop and turned it toward him. Franklin Finch had a son named James, born in late 1865 after the war. James Finch later moved to Virginia, where he served in the U.S. Navy during the Spanish-American War. He had a son named Robert, who also served in the Navy during the World War I. My grandfather's name was Thomas, Samuel said, frowning. Yes, but Thomas's father was Robert Finch. According to these records, your great-grandfather. Samuel stared at the family tree displayed on Eleanor's screen. The lineage was clear: Franklin Finch to James to Robert to Thomas to William to Samuel. 6 generations of Finches with military service woven through their history like a continuous thread. "So I am his direct descendant," Samuel said quietly. "It appears so, and there's something else." Eleanor hesitated. The records show that when James Finch was born, his mother's name was listed as Sarah Montgomery Finch. The implication hung in the air between them. Montgomery's lover had indeed been Franklin Finch's sister, and she had taken Montgomery's name despite the legal impossibility of an official marriage between them in that era. "We don't have a confirmed death date for Montgomery," Eleanor continued. "The official record states he went down with the Phantom, but if he and Franklin Finch conspired to fake the ship's sinking, he might have survived as well," Samuel concluded. "Maybe even escaped with Sarah." "It's possible, though he would have had to live under an assumed identity, given that he would have been considered a traitor to the Confederacy." Samuel thought of the sealed glass vial still hidden in his workshop, the document he hadn't yet been able to examine properly. "The letter in the vial might tell us more. You mentioned that yesterday. I'd very much like to help you open it properly. Our conservation lab has the equipment to do it without damaging the contents." Before Samuel could respond, his phone vibrated. "A text from Marcus Caldwell making inquiries about you. Direct questions about what you might have found. Careful." Samuel showed Eleanor the message. "Seems our collector friend is getting more curious. Ryan Caldwell has a reputation in historical circles." Eleanor said, her expression darkening. "Brilliant researcher, extensive private collection of Civil War artifacts, but his acquisition methods aren't always above board. There are rumors that he's acquired items that should rightfully be in museums or national archives. Any connection to the name Montgomery that you know of?" Eleanor blinked. "Not that I'm aware of. Why, his gallery in Norfolk is called the Montgomery Collection." "That's interesting." Eleanor turned back to her computer and began typing rapidly. "Let me check something." After several minutes of searching through databases, she sat back. "Well, that's certainly suggestive. According to these records, Ryan Caldwell's full name is Ryan Montgomery Caldwell. His mother's maiden name was Montgomery. So he could be related to James Davis Montgomery," Samuel said, "a descendant through another line. It's possible many Confederate officers' families changed or adjusted their names after the war, especially if there were controversial associations." Eleanor closed her laptop. "If Caldwell is a Montgomery descendant and he somehow learned about your find, he might believe he has a claim to the artifacts," Samuel finished, "or at least a personal interest in them, which could explain the surveillance." Samuel checked his watch, nearly 10 o'clock. "I should get back to my property. With Caldwell's people watching, I'm not comfortable leaving it unattended for long." "Of course." Eleanor gathered the documents, returning them to their folders. "But what about the sealed letter? Would you consider bringing it here? We could open it under controlled conditions, document the contents properly." Samuel considered this. His instinct was to keep the most crucial evidence close, but the letter might contain information vital to understanding the full story. And proper conservation was essential to preserve whatever message had been sealed away for over 150 years. "I'll bring it this afternoon," he decided, along with some of the other documents from the coffin. "Excellent. I'll prepare the lab." Eleanor handed him copies of the photographs and documents they had examined. "These are for you, not the originals, of course, but high-quality reproductions. I appreciate it, and everything you've done so far. This is the kind of historical mystery scholars dream about, Mr. Finch. I'm honored to be part of it." As Samuel left the university, his mind was filled with the faces from the photographs: Franklin Finch, his ancestor standing proud despite the prejudices of his time; Montgomery, the Confederate captain, who chose conscience over duty; and the unseen Sarah, who had connected them both and carried the Montgomery name forward through Samuel's own lineage. The coastal road back to his property was wet with drizzling rain, the promised storm beginning to arrive. Samuel drove carefully, checking his mirrors frequently for any sign of surveillance. No vehicles followed him, but as he approached the turnoff to his driveway, he noticed a sleek black Mercedes parked at the public beach access. Instead of turning in, Samuel continued past his property, slowing slightly to observe the Mercedes. A man sat in the driver's seat, not the hired surveillance operative from yesterday, but someone older, better dressed. Even through the rain-streaked window, Samuel could make out an expensive suit and carefully groomed silver hair. Ryan Caldwell had decided to conduct his surveillance personally. Samuel drove another half-mile down the road before turning around. When he passed the beach access again, the Mercedes was still there. This time he turned into his driveway, deliberately making eye contact with Caldwell as he passed. The message was clear. "I see you watching." Samuel's security system showed no alerts during his absence. He conducted a careful sweep of his property anyway, checking the workshop first. The coffin remained undisturbed beneath its tarp. The glass vial was where he had left it, secured in a small fireproof box, hidden beneath a false bottom in one of his toolboxes. Back in the house, Samuel placed the vial in a padded case designed for transporting delicate items. He added several of the oilskin-wrapped documents from the coffin, selecting those with official seals that might provide context for the Phantom's mission. Before heading back to the university, he decided to reach out to Marcus for an update. The sheriff answered on the second ring. "Caldwell's at the beach access near my property," Samuel said without preamble. "Mercedes sedan watching the house personally." "Damn," Marcus muttered. "That's escalating quickly. Want me to run him off?" "Not yet. Let's see what he does. But I wanted you to know in case things get complicated." "Always do with finds like this," Marcus sighed. "Where are you headed now?" "Back to the university, Doctor. Blackwood found some interesting connections. Turns out Franklin Finch was definitely my ancestor." "Direct line." "No kidding. So this really is your family history." "Looks that way," Samuel paused. "She also found evidence suggesting Caldwell might be related to Montgomery, the Confederate captain." "Well, that would explain his interest," Marcus said, "though not his methods. Want me to run a background check? Might be good to know exactly who we're dealing with." "I'd appreciate that." "Consider it done. And Sam, watch yourself. People get crazy around historical treasures, especially when family honor is involved." After ending the call, Samuel gathered the case containing the vial and documents. As he prepared to leave, he noticed the Mercedes still visible through the rain at the beach access. Caldwell hadn't moved. On impulse, Samuel changed his plans. Instead of driving past Caldwell again, he decided to confront him directly. Knowledge was power in any confrontation, and understanding his adversary's motivations might help navigate whatever was coming. Samuel drove to the beach access and parked beside the Mercedes. Caldwell watched him approach through the window, his expression impassive but alert. When Samuel tapped on the glass, he lowered it smoothly. "Mr. Finch, I presume?" Caldwell said, his voice cultured with the faint traces of an old Virginia accent. "I was wondering when we might meet." "Most people would call or knock on the door," Samuel replied. "Not hire surveillance or sit in the rain watching someone's house." Caldwell smiled thinly. "Direct. I appreciate that in a man." He extended his hand through the window. "Ryan Caldwell. And yes, I've been interested in your property since the hurricane. Word travels in certain circles about significant finds." Samuel shook the hand briefly, noting the firm grip and manicured nails. "Those circles seem to have remarkably detailed information about private property." "It's my business to know when historical artifacts emerge, Mr. Finch, particularly those relating to the Civil War era." Caldwell's pale blue eyes studied Samuel carefully. "I understand you found something that might have belonged to Captain James Davis Montgomery." So he knew the specifics. Samuel kept his expression neutral. "What's your interest in Montgomery, Mr. Caldwell?" "Professional and personal. My gallery specializes in Confederate naval artifacts, and Montgomery's final voyage represents one of the great unsolved mysteries of the period." Caldwell paused. "And on a personal level, James Davis Montgomery was my great-great-grandfather." There it was, confirmation of Eleanor's theory. Interesting coincidence. "Is it?" Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Finch. Just as I don't believe it's coincidental that a man named Finch found a coffin with connections to both Montgomery and a Union pilot named Franklin Finch." "You've done your homework." "Family history is a passion of mine. The Montgomerys and the Finches have a complicated past." Caldwell straightened in his seat. "I'd like to propose a private arrangement regarding whatever you've found, one that would be substantially more beneficial to you than the standard finder's fee under maritime salvage laws." "I'm not interested in selling," Samuel said flatly. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Finch, and I'm prepared to be extremely generous." Whatever you've found belongs in the hands of those who can properly honor its historical significance and the family legacy it represents. And you think that's you? I know it is. Caldwell's cordial tone hardened slightly. My family has spent generations trying to clarify what happened to the Phantom and its cargo. If you found evidence relating to Montgomery's final mission, it rightfully belongs with his descendants. Interesting perspective, Samuel said. But if Franklin Finch was involved, then his descendants have an equal claim, which includes me. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. So Dr. Blackwood confirmed your lineage. How convenient. The mention of Eleanor sent a warning signal through Samuel's mind. Caldwell was too well informed, too current on developments that had occurred just hours ago. This conversation is over, Samuel said, stepping back from the car. Whatever I've found will be handled according to proper legal procedures. If you have a legitimate claim, you can make it through official channels. A pity, but, Caldwell sighed. I had hoped we could reach an amicable arrangement. Private collector to private finder. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. When you reconsider, and you will call this number. My offer won't stay open indefinitely. Samuel took the card without comment and returned to his vehicle. As he drove away, he noted Caldwell watching him in the rearview mirror, already on his phone. The confrontation had confirmed Samuel's suspicions. Caldwell was personally invested in the Montgomery connection and had resources to pursue his interests aggressively. More concerning was his knowledge of Eleanor's involvement in the confirmation of Samuel's lineage information that was barely hours old. Someone was feeding Caldwell information, but who? The only people who knew about his discoveries were Marcus and Eleanor. Samuel trusted Marcus implicitly. They had a brotherhood forged in combat. Eleanor was a professional historian with a reputation to protect. Neither seemed likely to betray his confidence. Unless Caldwell had other sources of information, perhaps at the university itself. Instead of returning directly to campus, Samuel drove to a small cafe in town, found a quiet corner table, and called Eleanor. There's been a development, he said when she answered. I just had a conversation with Ryan Caldwell. He confirmed he's a Montgomery descendant, and he's very interested in what I found. You spoke with him directly, Eleanor sounded surprised. He was watching my property. I decided to confront him. That was risky. Calculated risk. I wanted to understand his motivation. Samuel paused. The concerning part is that he knew about our meeting this morning. Knew you had confirmed my connection to Franklin Finch. Silence on the other end of the line. Then that's impossible. The only people who knew about that were you and Fusam, and anyone you might have told. I didn't tell anyone, Mr. Finch. Her voice held a note of indignation. This is potentially groundbreaking historical research. I wouldn't compromise it by gossiping. Someone at the university then? Someone who might have seen us in the conservation room. Possible but unlikely. That area is restricted access. Only conservation staff and authorized researchers can enter, and no one else was there this morning. She paused. Unless what? There are security cameras in the conservation areas. Standard procedure for rooms containing valuable artifacts. The feeds go to campus security, but they're not actively monitored unless there's an incident. Who would have access to those feeds? Security personnel, certain administrators. It would take someone with university credentials to access them, and they'd need to know exactly what they were looking for. Samuel considered this. Caldwell has connections and resources. Could he have someone at the university? It's not impossible, Eleanor admitted reluctantly. He's made significant donations to several academic institutions, including ours. The new Montgomery wing of the library was funded by his family foundation. That was the connection. Money created access and influence, especially in academic settings where funding was always needed. I think we need to be more careful about where and how we examine the remaining artifacts, Samuel said. Caldwell made it clear he believes anything connected to Montgomery belongs to his family by right. He offered to buy whatever I've found for a generous price. That's not how historical artifacts work, Eleanor protested, especially those with national historical significance. I don't think Caldwell cares about the legal niceties. He strikes me as a man accustomed to getting what he wants. Samuel made a decision. I'm not bringing the letter to campus. We need a more secure location. Where do you suggest? Samuel thought for a moment. The County Historical Society has a small conservation facility. Marcus mentioned it yesterday. It's not as sophisticated as your lab, but it should have the basic equipment needed to open the vial safely. I can work with that, Eleanor agreed. This afternoon, I'll have Marcus arrange it. After ending the call, Samuel contacted Marcus explaining the situation and his concerns about security at the university. The Historical Society's closed for repairs after the hurricane, Marcus informed him. But I've got a better idea. County Sheriff's Office has a forensic lab for processing evidence. Small but well-equipped, and I can guarantee security. Perfect. Can you set it up? Already on it. Meet me there at 2 o'clock. Marcus paused. And Sam, I ran that background check on Caldwell. Nothing obvious in his legal history, but he's been peripherally connected to several investigations involving illegally exported historical artifacts. Charges never filed, but the pattern is interesting, meaning he has methods of acquiring things that skirt the law. Exactly, and connections to make problems disappear. Be careful. The rain had intensified by the time Samuel reached the sheriff's office, a modern single-story building on the outskirts of town. Marcus met him at a side entrance, leading him through a security door that required both a key card and a numeric code. Forensic labs through here, he explained, guiding Samuel down a corridor lined with official-looking doors. Not exactly the Smithsonian, but we can handle basic evidence processing. Should be enough for what you need. The lab was smaller than the university facility, but impressively equipped with microscopes, specialized lighting, and various scientific instruments arranged on stainless steel counters. Eleanor was already there setting up equipment under the watchful eye of a deputy. She looked up as they entered. Mr. Finch, I've prepared the extraction chamber for the vial. She gestured to a clear box with built-in gloves, similar to what Samuel had seen in biological containment facilities. This should allow us to open the seal without exposing the contents to sudden pressure or humidity changes. Samuel placed his case on the counter and carefully removed the glass vial. In the harsh fluorescent light of the lab, the document inside was more clearly visible, yellowed with age, but apparently intact. Remarkable preservation, Eleanor murmured, examining the vial without touching it. The glass appears to be hand-blown, probably custom-made for this purpose. The seal at the top is wax over what looks like cork, then wrapped with copper wire. Can you open it without damaging the contents? Marcus asked. I believe so. Eleanor gently placed the vial in the extraction chamber and sealed the outer door. Inserting her hands into the attached gloves, she began manipulating the vial with delicate precision. The key is to release the vacuum gradually. Too sudden a change in pressure could damage the paper. Samuel and Marcus watched in silence as she worked carefully unwinding the copper wire and then using a specialized tool to gradually loosen the cork seal. When the seal finally broke, there was a faint hiss of air. Perfect, Eleanor murmured. The vacuum has equalized. She carefully extracted the document from the vial, unrolling it with gentle movements. It appears to be a letter. The handwriting is different from Montgomery's journal, less formal, more urgent. Using tweezers, she positioned the letter under a mounted camera that displayed the contents on a monitor, magnifying the faded ink. The letter began without preamble, February 15, 1865. To whoever finds this record, the Franklin Finch write these words in haste and peril. 3 days ago, the CSS Phantom was deliberately run aground during a storm off the Carolina coast. This was not an accident, but an act of conscience. Captain James Montgomery and I could not in good faith deliver the Confederate Treasury gold to Nassau, where it would purchase weapons to prolong a war already lost. The official cargo manifest listed $200,000 in gold coin, but the actual amount was nearly twice that gold meant to fund continued resistance, even after Richmond's inevitable fall. We diverted this cargo, hiding the bulk of it where neither government could use it to spill more American blood. The location of the main cache is known only to Montgomery and myself. This smaller portion, sealed in the coffin, was meant to be discovered eventually, when passions have cooled and the truth can be told without igniting new conflict. Montgomery remains aboard the Phantom, as I write this, ensuring that pursuing Confederate agents believe the ship and its entire cargo are lost. By the time this letter is read, he will likely have paid for our actions with his life. I honor his sacrifice and his courage in choosing humanity over loyalty to a doomed cause. I must add a personal note that future generations may understand our unlikely alliance. James Montgomery married my sister Sarah in secret 2 years ago, defying laws that would forbid their union. Their love and their child, my nephew, represent the future we both wish for this wounded nation. A future where the dignity of all men is recognized and artificial divisions of race and section no longer determine a person's worth. If Providence allows, I will reach Union lines and ensure Sarah and the child are safe. Montgomery's sacrifice will not have been in vain. In witness whereof, I set my hand, Franklin Finch, formerly of the United States Navy. Samuel stared at the monitor, the words of his ancestor reaching across more than a century and a half. The letter confirmed what they had pieced together from fragments: the deliberate sabotage of the Phantom's mission, the personal connection between Montgomery and Finch, and the existence of a child who would carry both bloodlines forward. So Montgomery didn't survive, Eleanor said softly. He stayed with the ship to make the sinking appear genuine, and to give Franklin time to escape with the secret of where they hid the main cache of gold, Marcus added. Samuel was silent, processing the revelation that James Davis Montgomery Caldwell's ancestor had sacrificed himself for principle, for peace, and for the safety of his wife and child. A Confederate captain who had committed treason against his government because he believed the cause was lost and more bloodshed was futile. This changes everything, he said finally. Montgomery wasn't just Franklin Finch's co-conspirator. He was his brother-in-law, and their bloodlines merged. Which means, Eleanor began, then stopped, her eyes widening as she made the connection. Ryan Caldwell and I are distant cousins, Samuel finished, both descended from Montgomery and Sarah, just through different lines. That complicates the question of who has the stronger claim to these artifacts, Marcus observed. It's not about claims, Samuel said firmly. It's about truth. This letter, the journal, the medallion, they tell a story that's been buried for generations. A story of courage, conscience, and defiance of the racial boundaries of the time. A story that some might prefer remains buried, Eleanor pointed out, particularly those who've built family narratives around more conventional interpretations of their ancestors' roles in the Confederacy. The implication was clear. If Caldwell's family history celebrated James Davis Montgomery as a loyal Confederate captain who went down with his ship while on a mission for the cause, the truth revealed in Franklin Finch's letter would be deeply unwelcome. There's something else, Marcus said, studying the letter on the screen. Finch mentions a main cache of gold hidden somewhere only he and Montgomery knew about. That would be worth millions in today's currency. If it exists, Samuel cautioned, and if it was never found. Still, it explains Caldwell's intense interest, Eleanor said. If he believes the documents you found might contain clues to the location of that cache. The thought hung in the air between them. The historical significance of Samuel's find was already substantial. But if it also led to a hidden fortune in Civil War gold that would attract attention far beyond academic circles. We need to document everything properly, Samuel decided. Create a complete record of the coffin's contents before word spreads further. Agreed, Eleanor said. I can bring portable equipment from the university to your property. We'll photograph, catalog, and create digital copies of everything. I'll arrange for additional security, Marcus added. Deputy presence, discreet but visible. As they made these plans, a deputy appeared at the lab door. Sheriff, there's a call for you. Harbor Master says there's been a break-in at one of the storage buildings on the waterfront. Looks like someone was searching for something specific. Marcus frowned. When? Last night during the storm. Just discovered this morning when they checked for damage. Which building? The old records office. Files were scattered everywhere, mostly shipping logs and salvage records from the past 20 years. Marcus and Samuel exchanged a glance. Someone was looking for official documentation of items recovered from the coast, perhaps hunting for any record of the coffin. I need to check this out, Marcus said. Eleanor, can you finish up here and secure that letter properly? Samuel, you should head back to your property. I'll send a deputy to keep an eye on things until I can get there. Samuel nodded, though he was reluctant to leave the letter. Make copies first, he instructed Eleanor. Digital and physical. Too important to risk having only one version. Already planned to, she assured him. The rain had intensified to a steady downpour by the time Samuel left the sheriff's office. The coastal road was slick with water visibility, reduced to the range of his headlights. He drove carefully, alert for any sign of surveillance or unusual activity. The beach access near his property was empty, no sign of Caldwell's Mercedes. But as Samuel turned into his driveway, his headlights illuminated something unexpected. fresh tire tracks cutting across the wet gravel, leading not to his house, but toward the workshop behind it. Samuel stopped his truck, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Someone had been on his property while he was gone, recently judging by the crisp edges of the tracks not yet blurred by the falling rain. He reached for his cig, checking that a round was chambered before exiting the vehicle. Moving with the silent precision that had once been his professional hallmark, Samuel approached the workshop using the rain and gathering darkness for cover. The workshop door was closed but not locked. The padlock hung open on its hasp. Samuel positioned himself beside the door, listening for any sound from within. Nothing but the steady drumming of rain on the metal roof. In one fluid motion, he swung the door open and moved into the doorway, weapon raised, scanning the interior with practiced efficiency. The workshop was empty of people, but not undisturbed. The tarp had been pulled from the coffin, and the lid had been removed, entirely propped against the wall. The compartments inside had been rummaged through, their contents scattered across the workbench. Samuel did a quick inventory. The gold and silver were in his home safe, so nothing of monetary value had been taken. But several of the documents, still in their oilskin wrappings, were missing. As was something he hadn't fully examined yet, one of the copper tubes containing what appeared to be maps. The intruder had known exactly what to look for. Not the treasure, but the information, the potential clues to the location of the main cache mentioned in Franklin Finch's letter. Samuel secured the workshop and moved cautiously to the house, checking each room before determining it was empty. The safe remained locked and untouched. Whoever had broken in had targeted only the workshop. He called Marcus, immediately reporting the break-in and the missing items. "Damn it," Marcus growled. "Deputy's on his way to you now. Don't touch anything else. We'll process it as a crime scene." "Too late for that," Samuel admitted. "I've already checked the property to ensure it was clear." "Old habits," Marcus sighed. "Can't blame you. Any idea what they were after specifically?" "Information, not valuables. They took some of the documents and one of the map tubes." "Connected to the harbor master break-in, I'd bet. Someone's hunting for the main cache Finch mentioned." "Caldwell. He's got motive and resources, but breaking and entering is a significant escalation from surveillance." Marcus paused. "Unless he's more desperate than we realized." "Or unless what's in those documents is worth the risk," Samuel countered. After ending the call, Samuel rechecked his security system. No alerts had been triggered, which meant the intruder either knew how to bypass the sensors or had found a blind spot in the coverage. Either possibility was concerning, suggesting a level of preparation and skill beyond the typical burglar. The deputy arrived 20 minutes later, a young officer named Jenkins, who looked barely old enough to carry his service weapon. He took photographs of the workshop, documented the tire tracks as best he could in the worsening weather, and dusted for fingerprints with more enthusiasm than skill. "Sheriff Wheeler's on his way," Jenkins informed Samuel. "Said to tell you he found something interesting at the harbor master's office." Marcus arrived within the hour, rain dripping from his uniform hat as he entered Samuel's house. He declined the offered coffee, too focused on the situation at hand. "Harbor master confirmed someone broke into the records room last night," he reported. They went through the salvage logs for the past decade, but focused particularly on the most recent entries, post-hurricane finds. "Looking for any official record of the coffin," Samuel surmised. "Exactly. But here's the interesting part. Before leaving, they accessed the harbor master's computer, pulled up the coastal survey maps for this specific stretch of shoreline. They're looking for something underwater," Samuel said. "The main cache. That would be my guess, and now they have some of your maps and documents to help narrow the search." Samuel paced the room, thinking through the implications. Franklin Finch's letter said only he and Montgomery knew the location. If those maps contained clues, then whoever took them might find Civil War gold worth millions. Marcus's expression was grim. "And based on the tire tracks Jenkins photographed, we're looking at a high-end SUV with all-terrain tires. Matches a vehicle registered to Caldwell's company." So Caldwell broke in himself. Seems risky for a man of his position. Not necessarily himself, could have sent someone. But the timing is suspicious, right after he confirmed what you found and made you an offer you refused. The pieces were aligning too neatly to be coincidence. Caldwell's surveillance, the offer to buy the artifacts, the break-ins targeting information, rather than valuables, all pointed to a systematic effort to locate the hidden Confederate gold. "There's something we're missing," Samuel said, frowning. Caldwell's too well connected to risk criminal charges for a treasure hunt, even one potentially worth millions. His reputation, his business, he'd be risking everything. Unless he knows something we don't, Marcus suggested. Something that makes the risk worthwhile. Or unless it's not just about the gold. Samuel stopped pacing, a new thought forming. What if there's something else in those documents? Something potentially damaging to the Montgomery legacy? Marcus considered this. Family honor is powerful motivation, especially for old Southern families. If the full truth about Montgomery's actions would tarnish the family name, then Caldwell might go to extreme lengths to control the narrative. Samuel nodded slowly. We need to know exactly what was in those stolen documents and maps. Can you remember what they contained? Not specifically. I was waiting for proper conservation before examining them closely. Samuel rubbed his temples, trying to recall details. But one of the oilskin packages had an official Confederate Navy seal, and the map tube was marked with the letters CSSP, presumably CSS Phantom. His phone rang, Eleanor calling. Mr. Finch, she said urgently when he answered. I've discovered something important about the letter. There's a watermark on the paper only visible under specialized lighting. It's a grid pattern with numbers along the edges. A coded map, Samuel realized immediately. That would be my assessment. The letter itself may contain clues to deciphering locations on the grid. Her voice lowered. I'm concerned about security here. One of our technicians mentioned that someone from the administration was asking about our work this morning, specifically about any artifacts you might have brought in. Caldwell has people at the university, Samuel confirmed, and he's escalated. My workshop was broken into. Documents and a map are missing. Oh no, Eleanor sounded genuinely distressed. The letter, is it secure? Yes, I've placed it in the evidence lockup as Marcus instructed. But the copies, bring them here, Samuel decided, and any notes you've made about the watermark. If Caldwell's people are watching the university, you might be followed. I understand, I'll be careful. After hanging up, Samuel briefed Marcus on this new development. A coded map hidden in the letter itself, Marcus mused. Clever. Even if someone found the letter, they wouldn't necessarily recognize the watermark without proper equipment. But now Caldwell has some of the original documents and maps, Samuel pointed out, combined with whatever family records he might possess. He could be putting the pieces together, Marcus finished. We need to move quickly. The sheriff stepped outside to coordinate with his deputies, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts. He moved to the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, the ocean beyond barely visible through the downpour. Somewhere out there, beneath the dark Atlantic waters, lay the remains of the CSS Phantom, and perhaps hidden nearby a fortune in Civil War gold. Gold that two men had diverted from its intended purpose in a desperate bid to hasten the end of a bloody conflict. Two men from opposite sides of the war, connected by family and conviction, who had risked everything for what they believed was right. One had sacrificed his life. The other had carried their secret forward, preserving just enough evidence that someday the truth might be known. And now, more than 150 years later, their descendants were engaged in a new conflict over that same legacy. Ryan Caldwell seeking to protect or control the Montgomery family narrative, and Samuel Finch unexpectedly thrust into the role of guardian for a historical truth long buried. The irony wasn't lost on Samuel. After a lifetime of military service defending American interests abroad, his final battle might be fought on home soil, protecting a piece of American history that challenged conventional narratives about the Civil War. His reflection was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Eleanor's sedan pulled up beside Marcus's patrol car, the historian hurrying through the rain toward the house with a portfolio clutched protectively against her chest. Samuel met her at the door. Her hair was damp, despite the brief dash from car to porch, and her expression was tense. I think I was followed, she said without preamble. Black SUV kept its distance, but took every turn I did until I reached the county line. Then it dropped back. Caldwell's people, Samuel confirmed. They're getting bolder. Eleanor set her portfolio on the dining table and began extracting documents, high-resolution copies of Franklin Finch's letter photographs, showing the watermark and detailed notes on the grid pattern. The watermark appears to be a navigational chart, she explained, laying out the images. See these numbers along the edges. They correspond to latitude and longitude coordinates specific to the Carolina coast. Marcus joined them, examining the photographs with a professional eye. So Finch embedded the location of the hidden gold in the letter itself. Anyone reading it would just see his explanation and confession. But the real map was literally in the paper, Samuel said. Ingenious. There's more, Eleanor continued. Certain words in the letter appear to have been written with slightly heavier pressure. When isolated, she produced another image showing only specific words highlighted in the text. They form a separate message. Samuel read the highlighted words aloud. Cache-buried granite marker, Providence Point, 5 fathoms, southeast, bearing 240, brother, watches eternal. Coordinates hidden in plain sight, Marcus said admiringly. Providence Point, Eleanor explained, unfolding a modern nautical chart of the coastline. It's a small promontory about 3 miles offshore from your property, Mr. Finch. Barely visible at low tide, completely submerged at high tide. A granite marker 5 fathoms southeast, Samuel mused. That would place it in approximately 30 feet of water, depending on tides. Diveable with proper equipment, Marcus noted. Even in 1865, an experienced salvage diver could have reached that depth. In Brother Watches Eternal, Eleanor pondered, perhaps a reference to the relationship between Finch and Montgomery, or a physical marker of some kind. Samuel studied the charts, his mind working through the practical aspects of the hiding place. It's clever, deep enough to be hidden but shallow enough to be accessible with 19th century equipment, and a location visible only at certain times would make it difficult to find without precise knowledge. The questions, Marcus said grimly. How much of this has Caldwell figured out? If the stolen documents contain similar clues, then he might already be preparing a salvage operation, Samuel finished. Potentially an illegal one, given the historical significance of the artifacts. We need to secure the site, Marcus decided. I'll contact the Coast Guard and State Historical Preservation Office. If there's Civil War gold out there, it falls under protected historical artifact statutes. That will take time, Eleanor pointed out. Bureaucracy moves slowly, even for something this significant. And Caldwell has resources, Samuel added. Private boats, diving equipment, people willing to bend rules for the right price. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. The storm was intensifying, waves visible even in the gathering darkness as they crashed against the shore. Samuel made a decision. I need to see what's out there before Caldwell can mount an operation. In this weather, Marcus looked incredulous. The Coast Guard has issued small craft advisories all up and down the coast. Not tonight, Samuel clarified, but as soon as the storm passes. I have diving equipment, underwater lights. I can at least confirm if there's anything at the coordinates. That's still technically illegal salvage without permits, Marcus pointed out, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. Not if I'm just conducting a visual survey. No removal of artifacts. Samuel turned to Eleanor. Would you be willing to accompany me? Your expertise would be valuable in identifying anything we might find. Eleanor hesitated, clearly torn between professional caution and scholarly curiosity. Yes, if it's just documentation, not removal, the historical value of confirming the site would be immense. Then it's settled, Samuel said. Weather report shows the storm clearing by tomorrow afternoon. We'll go out at first light the day after. And in the meantime, Marcus asked, we prepare, and we watch for Caldwell's next move. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Samuel's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Finch, Ryan Caldwell's cultured voice was unmistakable. I believe you have something that belongs to my family, and now I have something that belongs to yours. What are you talking about, Caldwell? The full truth is rarely as noble as we might wish, Mr. Finch. The documents I've acquired tell a rather different story about our shared ancestors than the sanitized version you have been piecing together. His tone was smug, confident. Did you know that Franklin Finch was paid handsomely for his betrayal? Gold that was supposed to reach families left destitute by the war instead lined his pockets. That's a lie, Samuel said flatly, though a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. He hadn't examined all the documents yet. Could there be aspects of the story he didn't know? Is it I have Captain Montgomery's final orders in front of me? Orders countermanded by your ancestor. Orders that, had they been followed, might have provided relief to thousands of Southern civilians left homeless and starving. Caldwell's voice hardened. History is written by the victors, Mr. Finch, and the North won, but some truths can't remain buried forever. What do you want, Caldwell? A simple exchange. The artifacts you found for the documents I've acquired. We each tell the version of history that honors our respective ancestors. A gentleman's agreement between families with a complicated shared past. And if I refuse, then I'll be forced to pursue other avenues. Legal challenges to your salvage rights. Public revelations about Franklin Finch's true motives. And of course, continuation of my own recovery efforts at the site indicated in these fascinating maps. So Caldwell had indeed deciphered the location. The race was already underway. I'll need time to consider your offer, Samuel said, playing for time. Of course, you have until tomorrow noon. After that, my salvage team begins operations regardless of weather conditions. Caldwell paused. Oh, and Mr. Finch, I wouldn't involve Sheriff Wheeler any further. This is a family matter, after all. The line went dead. Samuel lowered the phone, meeting the questioning gazes of Marcus and Eleanor. Caldwell's decoded the location, and he informed them. And he's claiming the documents he stole tell a different story, that Franklin Finch betrayed Montgomery for money, not principle. That contradicts everything in the letter, Eleanor protested. Unless the letter was meant as cover a justification for actions driven by less noble motives, Marcus suggested. It wouldn't be the first time history's been sanitized by its participants. Samuel shook his head. No, I don't believe it. The medallion, the pocket watch, the care taken with the coffin's contents, those aren't the actions of someone motivated purely by greed. Caldwell could be bluffing, Eleanor said, trying to sow doubt to pressure you into his gentleman's agreement. Possibly, but he mentioned specific documents, Montgomery's final orders. Samuel turned to Eleanor. Would those have been among the papers in the coffin? Potentially. Official orders would have been sealed with the Navy Department stamp, which I did notice on one of the oilskin packages in your photographs. Samuel felt a cold certainty settling in his gut. Then we need to see those orders, understand exactly what Montgomery was commanded to do and what Finch might have helped him circumvent. Caldwell has them now, Marcus pointed out. Yes, but if they were official orders, copies would have been filed with the Confederate Navy Department. Samuel turned to Eleanor. Would those records have survived the war? Many Confederate government records were captured by Union forces when Richmond fell, she confirmed. They're now in the National Archives, but accessing them would take time we don't have. Unless, Samuel's expression shifted as a new possibility occurred to him. Caldwell's gallery, the Montgomery Collection. He specializes in Confederate naval artifacts. What are the chances he has copies of official records relating to Montgomery's command? Very good, actually, Eleanor said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Private collectors often have remarkable archives, especially when focused on specific historical figures. And if Montgomery was his ancestor, then Caldwell might have been collecting related documents for years, Samuel finished, including official orders and communications. You're suggesting breaking into Caldwell's gallery, Marcus asked, his tone making clear what he thought of that idea. No, I'm suggesting we visit it officially, openly. Samuel turned to Eleanor. As a respected historian researching Civil War naval operations, with me as your assistant. A reconnaissance mission, Marcus translated, a hint of professional appreciation in his voice. Exactly. We see what Caldwell has in his collection, particularly anything relating to the Phantom's final voyage. And if possible, we document it. Eleanor nodded slowly. It could work. The Montgomery collection is open to researchers by appointment. I could legitimately request access to specific materials related to my academic work. And I could accompany you as a research assistant, Samuel agreed. Former military taking courses in history after retirement. Not an unusual story. It's thin, Marcus warned, especially given that Caldwell knows who you are and what you found. But not impossible, Samuel countered, especially if Eleanor makes the appointment in her own name with no mention of me until we arrive. A calculated risk, Eleanor admitted, but potentially our best chance to see those documents before Caldwell begins his salvage operation. And while we're there, Samuel added, we might learn more about Caldwell himself, his resources, his plans, any weaknesses we could exploit. Marcus sighed, recognizing the determined look in his friend's eyes. It was the same expression he'd seen before dangerous missions in Afghanistan, a steady resolve that no amount of caution would deter. You're going to do this with or without my blessing. Aren't you? Samuel smiled slightly. Some things are worth the risk, Marcus. The truth about what happened in 1865. The legacy of two men who defied the conventions of their time. And yes, the potential recovery of historical artifacts that belong to the American people, not in a private collection. Just be careful, Marcus said finally. Caldwell's already demonstrated he's willing to break the law, and he has resources we can only guess at. We will, Samuel promised. And while we're in Norfolk, you can begin the official process for securing the underwater site. Coast Guard Historical Preservation Office, whatever it takes to establish legal protection. Already planning to, Marcus assured him, though bureaucracy moves slowly, as Dr. Blackwood pointed out. Then we'd better move quickly, Samuel said, his gaze turning toward the window in the storm-tossed sea beyond, because out there, somewhere beneath those waves, lies the truth about what happened to the Phantom's gold. And I intend to find it before Caldwell can rewrite history to suit his family's narrative. The rain continued to beat against the windows, but within the room a new sense of purpose had taken hold. The race to uncover a 150-year-old secret had begun in earnest, a race not just for gold, but for truth itself. Dawn broke over the Atlantic with a clarity that only follows a storm. The sky burned pink and gold, the horizon a crisp line between sea and sky. The ocean had calmed overnight, though the shore remained littered with debris, nature's reminder of yesterday's fury. Samuel stood on his deck, watching the first light glint off the waves. He'd slept little, his mind churning with possibilities. What if Caldwell was right? What if Franklin Finch's noble-sounding letter concealed darker motives? History was rarely as clean as people wished to believe. Eleanor arrived as planned, her sedan pulling up beside Samuel's truck at precisely 7 o'clock. She carried a leather portfolio and wore clothes suitable for a professional academic visit, blazer slacks, sensible shoes. Samuel had dressed the part of research assistant in khakis and a button-down shirt, his military bearing somewhat softened by reading glasses he rarely used. Ready for our reconnaissance mission, Mr. Finch? As ready as I'll be. Any word from Marcus? He called earlier. The paperwork for an emergency historical preservation order is being processed, but it will take at least an hour to clear all the bureaucratic hurdles. Caldwell won't wait that long. No, he won't, which is why this visit is crucial. The drive to Norfolk took just over 2 hours. They maintained a careful watch for surveillance, but no vehicles seemed to be following them. Eleanor had made the appointment by phone that morning, identifying herself only as Dr. Eleanor Blackwood from Coastal Carolina University, requesting access to the Montgomery Collection's archives for research on Confederate naval operations in early 1865. The Montgomery Collection occupied a restored 19th century warehouse in Norfolk's historic district. The red brick building featured large windows framed by navy blue shutters and an ornate brass plaque by the entrance. Inside, the space had been transformed into a gallery museum hybrid, with display cases containing Civil War artifacts arranged throughout the open floor plan. A young woman at the reception desk greeted them with professional courtesy. "Dr. Blackwood, Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. If you'll follow me." Eleanor shot Samuel a concerned glance. They'd hoped to avoid Caldwell himself, counting on him being occupied elsewhere. Now they would face him directly, with the added risk that he would recognize Samuel immediately. The receptionist led them through the gallery to a private office at the rear of the building. Ryan Caldwell rose from behind an antique desk as they entered, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly as he registered Samuel's presence. "Dr. Blackwood, what an unexpected pleasure to have someone of your caliber visit our humble collection." His gaze shifted to Samuel. "And Mr. Finch, this is surprising." "Mr. Finch has been assisting with my research," Eleanor explained smoothly. "He has a particular interest in naval operations during the final months of the Civil War." "Indeed," Caldwell's tone was dry. "A very specific interest, as I recall from our previous conversation." The tension in the room was palpable, but Caldwell maintained his veneer of Southern hospitality. "Please sit down. How may the Montgomery Collection be of service to your research?" Eleanor took the lead as they had planned. "I'm conducting a study on the Confederate Navy's final operations in 1865, particularly blockade runners operating out of Charleston and Wilmington. Your collection is known for its extensive materials on such vessels." "A fascinating period," Caldwell agreed, "when desperate measures were undertaken by brave men facing certain defeat. We're particularly interested in the CSS Phantom," Eleanor continued, I understand you have original documents relating to its final voyage. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying them both. The Phantom, yes, a special interest of mine given my family connection to its captain. His gaze fixed on Samuel. But then Mr. Finch has his own connection to that vessel, doesn't he? The pretense was crumbling already. Samuel decided to abandon it entirely. Yes, I do, as you well know. Then let's dispense with the academic charade, shall we? Caldwell's cordial mask slipped further. You're here because of the documents I acquired from your workshop. Documents that tell a rather different story than the one you've constructed around your ancestors' actions. I'd like to see those documents, Samuel said evenly. The complete set, not just selective pieces that support your narrative. My narrative, Caldwell laughed softly. History isn't a narrative, Mr. Finch. It's a record of actions and their consequences. And the records are quite clear about what happened to the Phantom's cargo. He opened a drawer and withdrew a folder, placing it on the desk between them. Captain Montgomery's final orders, countersigned by the Secretary of the Confederate Treasury. You'll note the specific instructions regarding the distribution of funds upon arrival in Nassau. Samuel took the folder, opening it carefully. The document inside was indeed an official order, the Confederate seal still visible on the yellowed paper. He read it aloud. Captain Montgomery is hereby instructed to deliver the enclosed treasury funds to our representative in Nassau, who will allocate said funds as follows: 60% for the purchase of supplies and munitions, 20% for diplomatic operations abroad, and 20% for direct relief of civilians in areas devastated by Union occupation. Samuel looked up. Relief for civilians. That's what you meant when you claimed Franklin Finch deprived suffering families of aid. Precisely. Caldwell's smile was cold. Noble-sounding justifications for theft often crumble when confronted with facts. Your ancestor didn't prevent arms purchases that would prolong the war. He stole money intended in part to feed starving Southern families. Eleanor leaned forward. May I? She asked, indicating the document. Samuel passed it to her, and she examined it with a professional eye. This appears authentic, she admitted, but it doesn't tell the complete story. Franklin Finch's letter suggested the official manifest understated the actual amount of gold. He claimed there was nearly twice what was officially listed. Convenient, Caldwell said dismissively. A thief claiming the victim had more than reported, so keeping some isn't really stealing. Unless it's true, Samuel countered, in which case the 20% allocated for civilian relief would still have been delivered if the official amount was accurate. A creative interpretation, Caldwell conceded, but speculative at best. What we know for certain is that your ancestor and mine conspired to divert Confederate Treasury funds. What we differ on is the motivation and morality of that action. Eleanor set the document down. Mr. Caldwell, history is rarely black and white, especially during wartime. Both men likely believed they were acting honorably given the information and circumstances they faced. How diplomatic of you, Dr. Blackwood. Caldwell's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened. Unfortunately, history isn't determined by committee vote or compromise. It's written by those who preserve and control the evidence. He nodded toward the folder. Which is why these documents are so valuable. And the evidence in the coffin I found, Samuel asked. Equally valuable, perhaps more so given the personal nature of the artifacts. Caldwell leaned forward. Which brings us back to my proposal. A gentleman's agreement between families with a shared history. You return the coffin and its contents to me. I return the documents I acquired, and we each preserve our respective family narratives. And the gold, Samuel asked pointedly. The main cache that Franklin Finch mentioned. Caldwell's expression revealed nothing. If such a cache exists and if it can be located, that would be a matter for proper salvage operations under maritime law. Operations you're already preparing, Samuel noted, despite the historical significance that would require proper archaeological protocols. I've merely assembled resources to investigate a site of potential historical interest, Caldwell replied smoothly. Any recovery operations would follow all applicable regulations. It was a practiced response, likely rehearsed for potential legal challenges. Samuel decided to press further. And what about the larger truth? That a Confederate captain and a black Union sailor cooperated across enemy lines, that Montgomery married Finch's sister in defiance of racial laws, that their bloodlines merged, making you and I distant cousins. That last point struck home. Caldwell's composure slipped momentarily, his jaw tightening. Some aspects of history are better left to private family discussion, not public dissemination, especially when they cannot be conclusively proven. Franklin Finch's letter states it explicitly, Eleanor pointed out. A letter written by a man with every reason to justify his actions, Caldwell countered. Without additional corroboration, it remains merely an unsubstantiated claim. Samuel studied Caldwell's reaction, understanding dawning. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not just the gold, not just controlling the historical narrative. You don't want it known that the Montgomery lineage includes black ancestry. Caldwell's expression hardened. The Montgomery name has stood for honor and distinction in Virginia for over 2 centuries. I will not have it sullied by unverifiable claims based on a single document of questionable provenance. Even if those claims are true, especially if they might be true, Caldwell snapped, then immediately composed himself. History serves the present, Mr. Finch. Some truths do more harm than good when dragged into the light after generations of settled understanding. Eleanor shook her head. That's not how historical scholarship works. We follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it challenges established narratives. A luxury of the ivory tower, Caldwell dismissed. In the real world, family legacies and reputations have practical consequences. Business relationships, social standing, philanthropic influence, these matter beyond academic debates about historical minutiae. Samuel could see the fundamental divide more clearly now. For Caldwell, history was a tool to be shaped and controlled, a resource to be exploited for present advantage. For Eleanor, and increasingly for Samuel himself, it was a truth to be discovered and honored, regardless of its implications for the living. I need to see the rest of the documents, Samuel insisted. All of them, before I can consider your proposal. Caldwell considered this request, then nodded. A reasonable stipulation. The archives are through that door. He gestured to a side entrance from his office. You'll find everything from the workshop laid out on the research table along with related materials from our collection. Take your time, I have matters to attend to elsewhere in the gallery. As Caldwell stood to leave, he added, but don't forget, Mr. Finch. My salvage team begins operations at noon regardless of your decision. The window for a gentleman's agreement is closing. The archive room was climate-controlled and well-organized with archival storage units along the walls and a large table in the center. As promised, the documents taken from Samuel's workshop were arranged carefully on the table alongside maps and other materials from Caldwell's collection. Eleanor immediately began examining them, her trained eye assessing both content and authenticity. Samuel focused on the map tube that had been stolen, now open to reveal a detailed nautical chart of the Carolina coast with annotations in faded ink. This is remarkable, Eleanor murmured. A survey map of the coastline from 1864 with soundings and navigational hazards marked. And these annotations, she pointed to handwritten notes along the margins. These appear to be in Montgomery's hand, matching the journal entries. Samuel studied the annotations, which included compass bearings and cryptic notations, PVPT, at a small promontory, GM5F SC240 Marsh, and a small X marked in what would be relatively shallow water. Providence Point, he translated, granite marker, 5 fathoms, southeast, bearing 240 degrees. It matched the coded message from Franklin Finch's letter perfectly. They really did create redundant clues, Eleanor said. The watermark in the letter, the coded message, and now these map annotations, all pointing to the same location. Insurance, Samuel surmised. In case one clue was lost or destroyed, others would survive. As they continued examining the documents, a pattern emerged. The official papers, orders, manifests, financial records, told the story Caldwell had emphasized a shipment of gold allocated for multiple purposes, including civilian relief. But personal correspondence and notes revealed Montgomery's growing disillusionment with the Confederate cause and his conviction that continuing the war would only bring more suffering. One letter particularly caught Samuel's attention, written by Montgomery to a fellow officer just weeks before the Phantom's final voyage. The Treasury officials speak of relief for our suffering populace, yet I have seen the manifests. The lion's share goes to arms dealers in Europe and to line the pockets of speculators who profit from our nation's death throes. When I raised concerns, I was reminded that a naval officer's duty is to follow orders, not question policy. Perhaps so, but a man's duty to his conscience supersedes even orders. This supports Franklin Finch's account, Samuel noted. Montgomery didn't believe the civilian relief story. He saw it as a pretext for continuing a lost war and enriching profiteers. And here, Eleanor added, pointing to another document, a personal note from Montgomery about meeting F in Norfolk. It's dated December 1864, matching the photograph we found of them together. They worked methodically through the materials, piecing together a more complete picture of the events leading to the Phantom's final voyage. The evidence increasingly supported a narrative of two men from opposite sides of the conflict, united by family ties and shared principle, who took extraordinary action to hasten the war's end. But they found nothing that directly confirmed or refuted Franklin Finch's claim about the marriage between Montgomery and Sarah Finch. Nothing beyond the pocket watch inscription and the reference in Finch's letter. Caldwell's right about one thing, Samuel admitted reluctantly. Without additional evidence, the marriage and family connection remains difficult to prove conclusively. Eleanor had moved to examining Caldwell's own collection materials. Wait, she said suddenly. Look at this. She had found a leather-bound volume labeled Montgomery Family Records, 1840 to 1880. Inside were meticulous genealogical notes, birth records, and family correspondence spanning the period. Most of this is standard family record keeping, Eleanor explained, turning pages carefully. Births, marriages, deaths, all properly documented. But look here. She pointed to an entry from May 1865, 3 months after the Phantom's presumed sinking. The entry recorded the death of James Davis Montgomery with the notation, lost at sea in service to the Confederacy. But beside it, in a different hand, in different ink, someone had written false JDM lived. See private papers, locked box. Someone in the Montgomery family knew he survived, Samuel breathed, and kept private records of what really happened. And if those records survived, Eleanor began, they'd be Caldwell's most closely guarded possession, Samuel finished. Not displayed here with the official family history. They exchanged a look of shared understanding. If Caldwell had inherited documents proving Montgomery's survival and potentially his relationship with Sarah Finch, it would explain his determination to control the narrative. Such evidence would confirm that the Montgomery lineage indeed included black ancestry through Sarah, something Caldwell was clearly desperate to keep hidden. We need to find those private papers, Samuel said. They could provide the definitive evidence we need. But where would they be not here in the public archives? Samuel thought about Caldwell's character, his pride in family legacy, his obsession with controlling the Montgomery narrative. Somewhere secure, but accessible. Somewhere he could consult them privately. His gaze fell on a small door at the rear of the archive room, not the entrance they had used, but another exit. It was unlocked. Beyond the door lay a smaller, more intimate space, clearly Caldwell's private study. Unlike the museum's public areas, this room reflected personal use, a comfortable chair, family photographs on the walls, books well-worn from reading rather than display. And on the desk, a wooden box with a brass lock. Old, perhaps early 20th century, but well-maintained. This has to be it, Samuel said. The locked box mentioned in the family records. The box was indeed locked, but the mechanism was simple. Samuel examined it carefully, then selected a paperclip from a holder on the desk. Years of SEAL training and covert entry hadn't faded with time. Within moments, the lock clicked open. Inside were documents far older and more fragile than those in the archive room. Letters, personal journals, and a small leather book labeled simply, The Truth, 1865 to 1868. With reverent care, Eleanor opened this book. It was a private journal, the handwriting matching Montgomery's from the official records, but less formal, more intimate. The first entry was dated April 30th, 1865. I write these words as a dead man. The world believes James Davis Montgomery perished with the Phantom in February, and so he did in all ways that matter. The man who now lives, who writes these words, is James Finch, husband to Sarah and father to young William. We have found sanctuary in a small community of free blacks north of Boston, where my altered appearance and Sarah's light complexion allow us to live without constant scrutiny. Franklin visits when his duties permit, bringing news of the war's end and reconstruction efforts. He survived, Eleanor whispered, and took Sarah's name to hide his identity. They escaped north, Samuel added, started a new life together. They continued reading, finding entries that spanned 3 years of Montgomery's new life as James Finch. He described the challenges of adaptation, the constant fear of discovery, but also moments of joy with his growing family. He wrote of Franklin's visits, their discussions about the hidden gold, and their agreement to leave it untouched, until a time when it might serve the healing of our divided nation rather than the ambitions of individuals. The final entry, dated July 1868, revealed the ultimate fate of the man once known as Captain Montgomery. Franklin has secured passage for us to England, where the stain of American racial divisions might fade enough for William to grow up unburdened by the circumstances of his birth. Sarah's health continues to decline, but the doctors believe the sea air might bring improvement. I leave these records in Franklin's keeping to be delivered to my brother Thomas when prudence permits the truth to be known. Perhaps one day when America has moved beyond the hatreds of this terrible war, the full story of the Phantom's gold and the choices we made can be told without shame or recrimination. So they left America entirely, Samuel said, started over in England. And Montgomery's brother received these records eventually, which were passed down through the Montgomery family line, Eleanor added. Protected but hidden, the truth preserved but not acknowledged publicly. Until Ryan Caldwell inherited them, Samuel concluded, and faced the choice of whether to continue concealing his family's true history. The sound of slow applause from the doorway interrupted them. Ryan Caldwell stood there, his expression cold but controlled. Bravo, Mr. Finch. Few people have the temerity to break into my private study and rifle through family heirlooms. Your military training serves you well. These records confirm everything, Samuel said, standing to face Caldwell. Montgomery survived. He married Sarah Finch. They had a child together and fled to England. Yes, Caldwell's admission was clipped reluctant. Though that child was not in my direct lineage, I descend from Thomas Montgomery, James's brother, who maintained the family name and position in Virginia society. But you knew the truth, Eleanor said. You had these records all along. I am the custodian of my family's complete history, Dr. Blackwood. The admirable and the inconvenient alike. Caldwell stepped into the room, his posture rigid with tension. But being a custodian means making judgments about what aspects of that history serve the present and future generations. It's not your judgment to make, Samuel argued. This history belongs to all the descendants, including me. Caldwell's laugh was harsh. The Finch line from Sarah and James died out in England within 2 generations. Your connection is to Franklin Finch, not to Montgomery directly. We're still connected by blood, Samuel insisted. Sarah was Franklin's sister. That makes us family distant but real. A technicality at best. Caldwell dismissed the claim with a wave. And irrelevant to the larger issue. These private papers are Montgomery family property, just as the artifacts in the coffin you found rightfully belong to the Montgomery estate as the property of James Davis Montgomery. That's not how maritime salvage law works, Eleanor interjected. Historical artifacts of national significance can be claimed by direct descendants with documented connection, Caldwell finished, which I have and Mr. Finch does not, at least not to the same degree. Samuel could see Caldwell's strategy now use legal technicalities and superior documentation to claim everything: the coffin, its contents, and the underwater cache they all now knew existed off Providence Point. The historical truth would disappear into private collections, the narrative controlled by the Montgomery family, as it had been for generations. What about the truth? Samuel asked quietly. Don't the American people deserve to know this story? 2 men from opposite sides of the conflict, connected by family and conviction, who took extraordinary action to end a devastating war. A romanticized interpretation, Caldwell scoffed. The reality is messier. Gold was stolen. Orders were disobeyed. A captain abandoned his post and his duty. For the higher duty of conscience, Samuel countered, and love. Quaint sentiments, Caldwell said dismissively, but hardly relevant to legal ownership of the artifacts. He checked his watch. Which reminds me, my salvage team begins operations in 3 hours. I had hoped we might reach an accommodation before then, but you seem determined to force a more adversarial resolution. Your salvage operation won't have proper permits or archaeological oversight, Eleanor protested. The historical value will be properly documented by experts on my payroll, Caldwell assured her. Nothing will be lost or damaged. It will simply remain in private hands rather than government institutions. Samuel's mind raced through options. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. Caldwell held too many legal advantages. Appeal to conscience seemed equally futile. The man had spent his life protecting family reputation above historical truth. Then a new approach occurred to him, one that might appeal to Caldwell's core motivation. What if we could protect the Montgomery legacy while still honoring the historical truth? Caldwell's expression showed cautious interest. Explain. A joint presentation of the artifacts and documents, Samuel proposed. Not as a story of theft or betrayal, but as one of conscience and reconciliation. Two families once divided by war, but united by marriage and shared values taking action to hasten peace. Montgomery and Finch as visionaries who saw beyond the conflict to America's reunited future, Eleanor added, catching on to Samuel's strategy. Their actions preserved both Confederate heritage and national healing. Caldwell considered this framing, clearly intrigued despite his skepticism. A creative interpretation. But it still acknowledges the personal connection between the families. In a way that honors both lineages, Samuel emphasized. The courage it took for a Confederate officer to follow his conscience and his heart, defying the prejudices of his time. The wisdom of a black Union sailor who collaborated across enemy lines for a greater good. These aren't shameful secrets, they're testaments to character that both families can take pride in. The historical significance would be immense, Eleanor added. The first documented case of high-ranking officers from both sides collaborating to end the war, a powerful symbol of reconciliation for modern America. Samuel could see Caldwell wavering the appeal to legacy and historical significance working against his ingrained secrecy. He pressed the advantage. Your ancestors chose to hide this truth because the America of their time wasn't ready to accept it. But we're not in 1865 anymore. Today, this story doesn't diminish the Montgomery name, it elevates it. Caldwell was silent for a long moment, his internal struggle visible in his expression. Finally, he spoke. Even if I were to consider such an arrangement, there remains the question of the gold. Its value is substantial beyond historical significance. It could fund the preservation and exhibition of the artifacts, Samuel suggested. A joint Montgomery-Finch Foundation dedicated to education about Civil War naval history and reconciliation efforts. With proper credit to the Montgomery family as primary donors, Eleanor added diplomatically. Caldwell paced the small, studied conflict evident in his bearing. Samuel remained silent, recognizing the man was at a decision point that generations of his family had avoided. I would require final approval on all exhibition materials and historical narratives, Caldwell said finally, and the foundation would bear the Montgomery name prominently. With Finch acknowledged as equal partners in the historical events, Samuel countered, and joint oversight of the foundation. And proper archaeological protocols for recovering the underwater cache, Eleanor insisted, with full academic documentation. Caldwell stopped pacing, his decision apparently made. I will cancel today's salvage operation. Instead, we will prepare a proper archaeological expedition with university participation and government permits. He fixed Samuel with a hard stare. But I expect the coffin and all its contents to be transferred to secure storage at a reputable museum pending our final agreement. Agreed, Samuel said, with joint Montgomery-Finch supervision of the conservation process. Very well. Caldwell extended his hand, his expression still reserved but no longer hostile. It seems our ancestors have forced us into an accommodation they themselves found necessary despite the social barriers of their time. Samuel shook the offered hands, sensing they had crossed a significant threshold. Not friendship perhaps, but a working relationship based on mutual respect for a shared history. There's one more thing, Samuel said. The full truth about Montgomery and Sarah, their marriage, their escape to England, their child. It needs to be part of the historical record. Caldwell's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. With appropriate context and dignity. Not sensationalized or reduced to mere scandal. Of course, Eleanor assured him. Historical accuracy with proper respect for all parties. As they prepared to leave, Caldwell retrieved the wooden box containing Montgomery's private journal. You should have a copy of these records, Mr. Finch. As you said, this history belongs to all the descendants. It was a small but significant concession, an acknowledgement of Samuel's place in the extended family narrative. He accepted the gesture with a nod of appreciation. The drive back to Samuel's coastal property was quieter than the journey to Norfolk, both he and Eleanor processing the unexpected turn of events. The confrontation they had anticipated had transformed into a fragile alliance with a promise of bringing a long-buried historical truth into the light. Marcus was waiting when they arrived, his expression shifting from concern to relief as they explained the outcome of their visit. So, Caldwell agreed to legitimate archaeological recovery in a joint presentation of the artifacts. His tone conveyed healthy skepticism. What changed his mind? Family legacy, Samuel said simply. Once he realized the Montgomery name could be enhanced rather than diminished by the truth, his perspective shifted. That and the practical reality that fighting us would be more costly than cooperation, Eleanor added, especially with official preservation orders in process. Speaking of which, Marcus produced a document from his jacket pocket. Emergency Preservation Order for the Providence Point site, signed by the State Historical Preservation Officer and the Regional Coast Guard Commander. No salvage operations permitted without proper archaeological oversight. Perfect timing, Samuel observed with a smile, though no longer necessary as leverage. Keep it anyway, Marcus advised. Trust but verify, especially with a man like Caldwell. As evening approached, the three of them stood on Samuel's deck, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The ocean stretched before them, calm now after the storm, its surface gilded with the day's last light. What happens now? Marcus asked. We plan the recovery operation, Samuel replied. Proper archaeological methods, university participation, government oversight, everything by the book. And then we tell their story, Eleanor added. James and Sarah Franklin and the Phantom's Gold, a piece of American history that challenges our understanding of the Civil War's final days. A story worth preserving. Samuel agreed, his gaze fixed on the distant water, where somewhere beneath the waves, evidence of his ancestors' courage and conviction had waited patiently for 150 years. 3 weeks later, a specialized archaeological recovery team located the cache exactly where the combined clues had indicated, 5 fathoms deep off Providence Point, marked by a granite obelisk long encrusted with marine growth. The underwater excavation, conducted under strict scientific protocols, revealed a watertight iron vault containing gold coins, Confederate treasury bonds, and additional documents preserved in sealed copper tubes. The value of the gold alone exceeded $15 million in modern currency. As agreed, it funded the establishment of the Montgomery Finch Foundation for Historical Preservation, with an emphasis on Civil War naval history and reconciliation efforts. The coffin Samuel had pulled from the storm-tossed beach, along with its contents and the recovered underwater cache, became the centerpiece of a traveling exhibition titled Across Enemy Lines: Courage, Conscience, and Reconciliation in the Civil War. It opened first at the Smithsonian in Washington, then traveled to museums throughout the country, including the Montgomery Collection in Norfolk, now expanded to acknowledge the full family history. The exhibition placard beside Montgomery's private journal perhaps best captured the spirit of their discovery. In the dying days of America's bloodiest conflict, 2 men from opposite sides found common cause through family bonds and shared principle. Their actions, once viewed as betrayal, can now be recognized as extraordinary moral courage. James Davis Montgomery and Franklin Finch chose conscience over duty, reconciliation over division, and in doing so embodied the better angels of our nature that Lincoln himself had invoked. Their legacy reminds us that even in our darkest hours, individual acts of courage can bend the arc of history toward justice and healing. Samuel visited the exhibition during its Smithsonian opening, standing quietly before the display case containing the silver medallion inscribed, "For Freedom to FF," a tangible link to ancestors whose courage had remained hidden for generations, now finally honored in the full light of historical truth. As he turned to leave, he noticed Ryan Caldwell similarly absorbed in contemplation before Montgomery's journal. Their eyes met briefly, mutual recognition passing between them, not friendship exactly, but a shared understanding. They had each surrendered something of their initial positions, compromised long-held family narratives in service to a deeper truth. And in that compromise, both had gained something more valuable than exclusive ownership of artifacts or controlled historical narratives. They had recovered a story of courage and conscience that belonged not just to the Montgomery and Finch families, but to the American people as a whole. Samuel returned to his coastal home with a sense of completion. The hurricane that had unearthed the coffin seemed in retrospect less random chance than the workings of time and tide, bringing truth to light when the moment was right. On his desk now sat framed copies of two photographs, his father at his SEAL qualification ceremony, continuing the family's long tradition of naval service, and beside it the sepia-toned image of Franklin Finch standing alongside James Montgomery in 1864, two men from worlds apart united by principle and family bonds that would endure for generations. Outside his window, the Atlantic continued its eternal rhythm against the shorekeeper of secrets and revealer of truths, a constant reminder that history, like the tide, may recede from view, but never truly disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to return, bringing its treasures back to the light of day. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Samuel stood on his deck, watching a December sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of amber and gold. The air had turned cold, carrying that particular crispness that only winter brings to the Carolina coast. The Montgomery Finch Foundation had exceeded expectations, funding not only the traveling exhibition, but also a scholarship program for students researching reconciliation efforts throughout American history. Applications had poured in from universities across the country, young historians eager to explore those moments when division gave way to unity, when individual conscience transcended political allegiance. Samuel traced his finger along the weathered railing, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his skin. This deck had been rebuilt after Hurricane Florence, stronger than before. Like history itself, destroyed and reconstructed, but carrying the memory of what came before. Marcus's patrol car pulled into the driveway right on schedule. The sheriff emerged carrying a bottle of bourbon and two glasses of tradition they'd established since the discovery. The two men settled into their usual spots. The bourbon poured a comfortable silence between them as they watched the last light fade over the water. "Got a letter from the Secretary of the Navy today," Samuel said finally. "The Naval History and Heritage Command wants to create a permanent exhibit about naval personnel who served in conflicts from both sides. They're calling it Divided Loyalties, United Service. The Phantom story will be featured prominently." "Well deserved," Marcus nodded. "Though I imagine there are some in the brass who weren't thrilled about highlighting a captain who disobeyed orders, even if it was for the right reasons." That's the point, though, isn't it? Service isn't blind obedience. Never has been. It's doing what's right even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. They sipped their bourbon, letting the warmth spread through them as the first stars appeared overhead. "Caldwell's come around more than I expected," Samuel admitted. "Donated additional Montgomery family papers to the National Archives. Stuff nobody's seen in 150 years. People can surprise you, even the ones who seem most set in their ways. The country could use more of that kind of surprise these days. More willingness to reconsider entrenched positions when new evidence comes to light." A night heron called somewhere along the shore, its voice carrying across the darkening water. Samuel thought about the men whose actions had shaped his family's history, men who had chosen the harder path of conscience over the easier road of conformity, who had risked everything, including their names and reputations, for what they believed was right. "You know what strikes me most about this whole thing," Samuel said. "Montgomery and Finch didn't act to be heroes or to have their names in history books. They acted because they couldn't do otherwise and still face themselves in the mirror. That's real service, not for recognition, but because duty demands it." "The best kind of patriotism," Marcus agreed. "Loving your country enough to help it live up to its ideals, even when that means standing against the tide. Even when it means being misunderstood for generations." They finished their drinks as full darkness settled over the coast. In the distance, the beam from a lighthouse swept across the water, regular, reliable, a guide for those navigating dangerous waters. "Eleanor tells me they've confirmed 3 more students for the summer research program," Samuel said. "Young historians focusing on other examples of cross-line cooperation during the Civil War. Turns out Montgomery and Finch weren't entirely unique. History's always more complicated than the simplified versions we learn in school, and more hopeful in some ways. Even in our darkest chapters, there were people finding ways to see beyond the divisions of their time." Samuel stood, stretching his back after too long in the deck chair. The night had grown colder, but he wasn't ready to go inside just yet. The vastness of the ocean and sky held him there, a reminder of how small individual lives are against the sweep of history, yet how significant their choices can become. "I'm heading up to Arlington next week," he said, "visiting Dad's grave. Thought I might stop by the National Archives while I'm there, see the new Montgomery Finch collection they're preparing." "Give the old man my respects," Marcus said quietly. "Will do." The future stretched before them like the dark ocean, unknown, but not unknowable, challenging, but navigable with the right compass. Samuel thought about the generations that would come after him, the young historians already digging into the Montgomery Finch papers, finding new connections and insights that would reshape understanding of the past and perhaps illuminate paths forward. That was the true legacy of what they had discovered, not just gold or documents or family connections, but a reminder that in every era, the courage of individuals can transcend the failures of institutions, that conscience can bridge divides that seem unbridgeable, and that the most profound acts of patriotism sometimes require standing apart from the prevailing winds of one's time. The tide was coming in its rhythm unchanged since Montgomery and Finch had walked these same shores. Some things remained constant: the pull of the moon on the waters, the cycle of seasons, the enduring need for men and women of principle who understood that loving one's country meant helping it become better, truer to its highest aspirations. Samuel smiled into the darkness. Their story was in good hands now, and tomorrow the sun would rise again over these waters, illuminating whatever new treasures the restless sea might choose to reveal.